Hi, I'm Russell Kirkby. This is Sidario. Now, there's no right or wrong way to interpret the rules as written in Dungeons & Dragons. Today, I want to give you a few tips about how you can manage and roleplay critical hits, critical skill checks, and critical failures in your game. So what happens when you roll your d20 for your attack roll and you roll a 20 or a 1? Well, a 20 is a critical hit, and it doesn't matter what the modifiers are, it doesn't matter what the armor class is, you always hit on a 20. Similarly, when you roll a 1, this is a critical failure, and it doesn't matter about the armor class, it doesn't matter what modifiers you might have on top of your roll. A 1 is a failure, it misses. Okay, so when you get a critical hit with an attack roll, you get to double the dice of the weapon attack. So if it's a dagger, for example, it's a d4 typically, you get to double that. You roll 2d4. Now, if you've got a sneak attack, because you're a rogue, you've got the sneak attack feature, that's typically a d6. So now you're adding your d4, doubling your d4, you're rolling 2d4, and you get to roll a d6 for your sneak attack. You get to roll 2d6 for your sneak attack. So you've got 2d4 and 2d6, and you roll all of those dice and you add those together, and now you add the modifier at the end. So what happens when you roll a critical success or a critical failure and you're making a skill check? This is a bit different from attack rolls. In the rules as written, there is in fact no such thing as a critical success or a critical failure. So you get to add your modifiers, and that's the number that you get against the difficulty class of the task that you've been given by the DM. So you might be a rogue, you've got expertise, you get a plus 12, plus 16 to your dice roll, so even if you roll a 1, you could potentially still succeed. Now, a lot of DMs will still say that a 1 or a 20 is a critical success. These are homebrew rules, these are house rules, but they may very likely apply because a lot of DMs use them. And if you roll a 1 with a skill check, you may very well fail. And if you roll a 20, you may very well succeed, regardless of the actual difficulty class of the skill check. So it might be that you roll a 20 on your lockpicking and the DC is very high and you automatically succeed. Or it could be a case of you roll a 1 with your lockpicks and you break your lockpicks. If the DM decides that the task that you're trying to achieve is impossible, then your critical 20 may not actually succeed the way you want it to. If you try to jump off a building in Neverwinter and you want to arrive in Waterdeep, now that's a task that's pretty much impossible. You can roll your d20 and you can hope just to land on your feet. If you're really lucky and the DM's nice, you might land on the back of a cart that's on its way to Waterdeep, but you're not going to jump off a building and land in Waterdeep. Critical successes and failures with saving throws are very much the same as skill checks. The rules as written don't actually cover this at all. There are no critical successes or critical failures with saving throws. However, again, it's up to the Dungeon Master. A lot of Dungeon Masters like to utilize this system in order to add a little bit of flavor to the game. So, for example, a monster with a very high challenge rating might have a very high DC, like for example 24, and even with your modifiers, you might only be able to roll a 21. So theoretically, you wouldn't be able to match that DC, but the DM might feel lenient and allow you to roll a natural 20 and succeed despite the fact that you don't reach that DC technically. They may allow you to get out of the way and take half damage instead of full damage on that fireball. Critical successes to hit rolls can potentially be heroic moments for your player characters. This is your opportunity to give the player a chance to shine through their role-playing and through the storytelling that you're doing. This might be a moment where the player's going to go home and tell their family and their friends and their workmates all about this moment that occurred in the game where failure was turned around, where something that seemed impossible was achieved. So you want to give an opportunity to your players to actually have these heroic moments from time to time, and when they roll 20s, this is a great opportunity for you to do that. Critical hits and critical failures can get quite repetitive in game. There's a fairly high chance of rolling a 1 or a 20 on any given dice roll. So using the context of the scene is a really good way to inform the outcomes of your critical successes and failures in order to change the gears up and make them more flavorful. So let's take an example where we have two characters who are rolling around grappling one another, and you've got a third character who's going to come along and try and attack the enemy. They're trying to save their friend who's grappling with the enemy on the ground, and they're rolling over in the grass, tumbling around, right? So now you're going to roll your dice to hit, and you're trying to hit the enemy, obviously, not your friend, and it's going to be tricky because they're rolling and they're moving. This is part of the dynamics of the scene. And this is the context. So now, using that context, we can decide that if you get a 20, you hit critically the enemy character. But if you roll a 1, you may very well hit your friend. And that is how you use context to inform your critical success outcome or your critical failure. So when it comes to critical fails, you really want to read the room to make sure that your players aren't getting demoralized if they've had a few critical fails and they're not really having fun anymore. So when you're considering this, you might want to be a little bit less punitive in terms of your descriptions and outcomes for your critical fails. As a dungeon master, when you are making skill checks with your players and your players make critical failures for their attack rolls specifically, you really have to think about how punishing you're going to be, and you need to think about that from the beginning of the campaign too, because you're going to set the mood and the tone for the whole story for the rest of the game. So if you're playing a game where you want it to be gritty and realistic, and you want them to make critical failures and reasonably often, you want to consider that, and you want to set that tone early on so the players can adjust to that. Whereas if you're going to have a more forgiving kind of a game where critical failures aren't going to necessarily mean the end of the world every time they make one, you probably want to set the tone for that too near the beginning of the game, so that for the rest of the campaign your players are not spending their entire time freaking out about it. Some dungeon masters will simply say you drop your weapon, you break your weapon, you hit your friend, you hit yourself, you lose your arrow, you break your arrow. You could make a table out of these things to sort of make it even more, to give some variety and flavor to that. And also, tables are quite useful because you can mitigate the fact that there's actually a 5% chance of getting a critical failure every time you roll to hit. And that's not necessarily very realistic. I mean, more usually I would think that when you try to hit something and you're either going to hit or you're going to miss most of the time. It's very unlikely that you would actually have a critical failure and break your weapon or otherwise cause yourself some sort of further trouble. How do you handle a natural 1 when you're a player? So really, the best way to handle rolling a critical failure as a player character, don't throw your toys. What you want to do is read the room, read the DM, look at the context of the scene, and figure out why you rolled that natural 1. What was the factor involved in the scene? What is the context of the scene, and how can I read the context of the scene and the dynamics of the scene to inform my failed action and make it fun? Make it fun for myself. Make it fun for the group. This is an opportunity for you to reveal plot, theme, or character. So don't throw your toys.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You know who this is?
No, who is this?
Toto? I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Hello, hello, Internet. We
Hello,
are here.
Internet.
This is a Get Us with the Game Podcast, and with me tonight is Russell. Hello. With
Hello.
RKDM. And not with us tonight, as you will notice if you have been watching our show, is Doc, which I will get to in a minute.
What's his excuse this time?
Like I said, I got a good one tonight, so we'll see. But if you're just joining us tonight, we are The Game, hosted by Dungeon Studios, a tabletop talk show and podcast. We go beyond live play and dive deep into every topic from session zeros to campaign heroes. You'd think I would memorize that by now, but I still don't have it memorized. Working on it. Anyway, with lively debates, thoughtful analysis, and plenty of laughs, our weekly podcast is the perfect companion for any D&D fan. We stream live and interact with our chat on Facebook every Monday, most every Mondays, at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, and 2 p.m. New Zealand time. All right, let's get into it. Russell, we have a good topic tonight. I am very excited about it.
Yeah.
So for those of us that are watching, we're going to give you guys some time. We're going to do some of our, what is it? The in-house stuff, housekeeping.
Housekeeping.
But then later on, we're going to be talking about traps and puzzles. So you're going to want to stick around. And
Indeed.
yes. Oh, hey, Avery. I am so glad Avery's with us. I'm just getting used to, I'm learning all the people that know you.
Right. Right. And similarly, it works both ways. So
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So, Doc not being with us tonight. I say it's because he's hiding in a tree. Have you?
Hiding.
Yes. Have you ever seen him hiding in a tree before?
Well, oddly enough, I know I have not seen him hiding in a tree. There could be a reason for that.
There is a reason. It's because he's so good at it. That's why no one has seen him hiding in a tree before.
Wow.
And that's what I believe he is doing until it's time for him to come back to the show.
Right.
Regardless.
I sort of thought he might have been caught in some sort of trap somewhere.
Oh, that would have been a much better reason.
Maybe he failed some puzzle and ended up trapped in a dungeon.
It's
somewhere.
a trap.
It's a trap.
Yeah, man.
Yes.
That was a missed opportunity right there. Dagnabbit.
Well, I don't know. We kind of found it again. It's all right.
Yeah.
It worked in the end.
But for those who love Doc and miss seeing Doc on the show, I do want to promise you he's alive, he's well. We'll let him out and back onto the show whenever he stops hiding in the tree.
When he's finished his penitence.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but he's doing well. I miss him a lot. We talk off show, but can't wait to have him back.
Yes.
All right.
Indeed. Then we can have all of his brain lore and pop cultural freaking everything. Yeah.
I love it. Yes. And while we're doing our housekeeping, if you enjoy our show, please remember to like and subscribe where you listen to it. Please share it with your friends. We have been kind of changing our format a little bit here and there to kind of keep up with the times. We've been adding music videos into our breaks, which are very good. I am really looking forward to our break videos. So we've got a little bit of something for everyone. So if you like us, if you like what we discuss, please help us out, and we appreciate it.
Yes, indeed. So,
indeed.
How is everyone anyway? Anybody on stream listening? They want to tell us about their days so far?
Yeah, everybody in the chat, let us know how you're doing.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting on that, so it looks like we don't have a lot of nerd news this week. There's probably a couple reasons for that, which I will get into. One is probably there's just not a lot of nerd news.
I'm nerds sure did anything. The nerds were all at home quietly doing quiet things this week, apparently.
Yes. I was also going to say, Final Fantasy 16 came out, so probably all the nerds were at home playing that, just like me. Also, I think we were talking about possibly dialing back our nerd news a bit and maybe not necessarily discussing every movie and TV show and really focusing on tabletop games, which is what we like to discuss. So we may be scaling back on this. We're not entirely certain where this is going to go in the future, but if you have strong thoughts on it, let us know in the chat.
I see Avery says that he's just doing some home improvement stuff. Is that like putting in pit traps and wall spikes and stuff? I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes.
Me and my husband, we've been talking about if we ever get to, buy our dream home, that we would put one of those like secret bookcase passageways, secret rooms, something like that. But I've never considered putting a trap in my house. And now that could be a possibility.
Could be. It could also be dangerous too. I mean, having traps in your own house.
I mean, well, if we're living out in the country, I guess we don't have to worry about like solicitors. But living in a city, I would love to have a trap just for solicitors. Like if there was a way to just identify those folks and
Right.
drop them in a pit and maybe return them to
Right.
like 2 blocks away, it'd be perfect.
Right. Sounds fair. Well, you could have a solicitor golem, like a golem made out of solicitors.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, scary thought. Well, so where do we start today, Amber?
Yeah, well, and we might
We're
have to
going
like
next.
push the breakout a bit since we usually have so much to talk about in our first half. We're probably going to push
Right.
the breakout a little bit further so that we kind of even out the show a bit. But let's go ahead and bypass nerd news for now and discuss your week in games.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to update as far as my tabletop gaming goes. I am, what's the word I'm thinking of? Brainstorming some terrain pieces, and I am considering, based off of the feedback I have gotten, making a video out of it.
You
So
should.
the
It's great.
video will probably take a while to edit and put together, but the piece I will probably show off once I get it done. Ooh, maybe not. I don't know. Let me think about this because some of my players actually listen to the show. So I'll have to wait until after the
Be
reveal,
careful.
then put it on the
Yeah.
show. But I am brainstorming some pieces. I like to focus on finding everyday household junk and repurposing it for terrain. That's kind of like my little niche, I guess, if you will. I do the other, standard, with the foam and the glue and all the things, 3D printing even. But I really like repurposing just homemade junk. So I already have some ideas. My son's been eating a lot of fruit cups and Jello cups lately.
Perfect.
And
Right.
then you guys will get to see what I turn that into.
Anything with odd shapes and stuff that's, you can
Yeah.
turn to architecture of
Oh,
some
I
description.
can show.
Yeah.
Let me grab something real quick.
Cool. And now I'm looking around my room wondering
So,
what I can
this is
repurpose.
something that came with the PlayStation that I just got because I'm playing Final Fantasy, and it's just one of those
So
little,
jealous.
like
Oh,
empty
yes.
pieces. But I feel
It
like
could be a
I
pit
could.
or it could be a building, couldn't it?
I hadn't thought about using it as a pit, but you're right. It could be some kind of a pit. But I thought for a large scale map where like there's a big battle in a huge city, this is just an easy spray
Right.
paint. Put it on
Right.
the city streets, and I have 2 pieces
Oof.
like this that are different
Just like
shapes. They're
that.
not even the same shapes.
Nice.
Yeah, so
Nice. Yeah.
perfectly easy to just.
You could
have
cut it in half too. I don't know whether that's a good idea, but then you'd have
Cut it
two
in half.
pieces that you could cut it down the middle, and then you'd have a flat side that could sit upright.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah.
You know
I
what I mean?
haven't
And,
quite figured out
I don't know.
exactly
Just
how I'm
things you
going
could
to
do with it.
use this, but yeah,
Right.
2 pieces that are not exactly the same, so they look like different buildings. And whenever I see stuff like that, like this is the problem, is I need storage space because I see this stuff and I just hoard it away somewhere until I actually need it. But I have like my own little shopping market of random junk that I can use whenever I
That's
create
awesome.
terrain. So.
Love it.
So there's that for my week in games.
Hmm.
Let's see. Oh, look at that. Avery loves repurposing junk too.
Yeah, he makes lights. Avery makes lights. In fact, if you get a chance, check out Avery's Instagram because he's got some fancy lights. He does a lot of steampunk type stuff, I think. That's how I read it anyway. I'm not an expert in these subjects, but
Avery,
yeah,
drop a link.
He makes some cool shit.
Yeah, that's cool.
He's made like stuff out of musical instruments and things that have been repurposed into lamps and stuff like that with, gears and dials and stuff. Yeah, it's
super
cool art. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know, Avery, if
Sorry.
you heard me. Drop a link though, because if other people aren't interested, I am definitely interested. So I will take a look.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, aside from brainstorming terrain, which I kind of have an idea already what I'm doing, I have been playing Final Fantasy 16 because it came out. And I just have a quick funny story because I see you wear glasses. I
Right.
just recently, within the last year, I think a year ago-ish, finally was told I needed glasses, but I am in the camp where I kind of refuse to wear them unless I really need to, because,
Right.
and maybe it's just because I haven't found the right pair, but the pair that I got, they hurt my ears, they slide off my nose. I probably just didn't pick like the right pair of glasses, and so I don't wear them a
Do
lot
you,
unless I'm
are they
working.
for reading or for like other tasks?
Well, specifically, my doctor said that I need to use them when I'm working, so on the computer or reading, but that I
Right.
could wear them all the time. And I do notice, like, if I'm watching TV and the TV's far away, like, I have a hard time reading the text. And I am old enough
Text.
that I
Right.
do closed captions because I need the closed captions. So,
Right.
so reading is a problem. But with Final Fantasy, it takes so long. If you're a Final Fantasy nerd like me, you're waiting a minimum of 3 years between games, most likely longer. And so it's been a while
Right.
since I've played a game because that's typically what I play exclusively. There are some other off brand stuff but it's always Final Fantasy for me. So it's been a long
Right.
time since I've sat and played a video game. And so I sat down, I start playing. I can't read the text. So I spent some time tweaking the settings on the game to make the text larger. I spent some time tweaking the settings on the TV to make the text larger and clearer and crisper. And finally, my 15-year-old son walks into the room and he goes, "Mom, put your glasses on." And so I finally gave in. And it was just a kick in the I'm old gut that I have to now wear glasses to game. It just feels very strange to me. So,
Right. Fair enough. Yeah, I've been wearing glasses for about a year too. I've got two pairs, and I need them for reading. But some days I seem to be able to get by without wearing them, and I don't seem to need them so much. And other days everything's blurry.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I
I've
don't
had
know.
that same thing too. And that's what it is. See this little, you guys probably can't see this here, but I have this little wrinkle that's starting right here. Oof.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
the
I see that with
glasses
my
are my
glasses.
way of like, I'm going to prevent this wrinkle from getting any worse.
Right. Well, maybe contacts is the answer then. And
Maybe.
then you get contacts, and you can have red eyes and orc
Ooh.
eyes and all sorts of stuff like that. That could be fun.
Yeah, that could be
Expensive though.
fun. Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
used to live in China. You could buy contacts super cheap in China, I'll tell you what. But anyway, yes.
Well, Michael
So
and Jeremy
more about
really
your
love your
game.
glasses. They
Gaming.
say, look at Russell, very attractive. Glasses are attractive.
Well, thank you, Michael and Jeremy. That's very kind of you. Who are you? Who are you schmoozing? What do you
Yeah, what do
want?
they want?
I'm cynical. So,
All
did you
right.
play any D&D this week?
No D&D this week. Like
No
I said,
D&D.
we've got two games going on, and they're both monthly, and they both tend to usually happen around the same week-ish.
Right.
So it'll probably be a couple more weeks.
They sort of coincide. Okay, fair
Yeah.
enough. Well, there
So
you
what
go.
about you? Anything in your week in games?
Yeah, well, I mean, I run a lot of games, so it's quite a lot of things happening, really. Last night we had The Burning Path, which you can check out on Twitch. It's twitch.tv/roll stream, where you can check that out. The Burning Path, basically, our characters are forming a rebellion against the evil Barakyle wizards, who are taking over the world, basically using diplomacy and other sorts of wizardly tricks and stuff. They're a bit like the Wizards of Thay, the Red Wizards of Thay. They wear red robes and so on. So their next task is to sink a Barakyle envoy ship. And they've just received a whole bunch of stuff from a new patron who is the arch war mage of Dagdagiel, which is the city that they're in. And he's given them secret passages into what they call the Grey Walls, because Dagdagiel is a city of walls, basically massive walls, concentric walls, each higher than the last, sort of forming a pyramid shape, sort of set into the base of a mountain near the coast. And so there's like moats and things, and these walls all have these big block fortresses, like squat square fortresses set into the walls, and each one of those towers essentially is a keep that belongs to a different house, and these houses are all infighting, and they've been doing so for centuries. So inside the walls, there are all these secret passages where some of them are more or less secret, where messengers go through all the time. They're like roads, while others, the grey roads, are secret passages, and people occasionally get lost and die and never come back, or they find their way into the sewers and get kidnapped by the cult of Eutris or something like that. In any case, the players received a hideout. Their patron, this new patron from House Baleburn, the Arch War Mage of Dagdagil, gave them this little complex of about 5 rooms inside the Grey Roads, where he's outfitted them with 1,000 gold pieces, some scrolls of sending, and a bunch of stuff, basically, to help them support their rebellion, which they're trying to get started. And he's also given them papers to get them on his private ship, which he has docked in a secret location near the city, so that they can go out and take out this Barakyle envoy ship before it arrives. So that's what that group have been up to. I must say, Avery was on stream last night. He was looking very dapper. So if you want to see what Avery looks like, you can go and check out the Burning Path and see him playing. He's the dapper, handsome-looking fellow.
Very cool.
What else is going on?
That's on your channel, your stream, right?
It's on my Twitch channel. Yeah.
To anybody who's in here, we'll share the link later.
Yeah. The Sunfall campaign, which Avery is also playing in, is a face-to-face campaign, which we play on Wednesday nights here in New Zealand. And in that campaign, they are currently... So in the last game, they were brought to their... There's this dwarf mobster crime boss called Drizael, who's they've been working for on and off. And one of the player characters, Cathra, her player, Emma, had to leave maybe a month or two ago, and she couldn't play anymore. So I had her character be kidnapped, and they've been trying to find out where that is. So in the last session, this box turns up with her hand in it. And a note saying, if you want to save her, she's in the necropolis, find her here. So we did this dungeon crawl last week on my new map, which was really exciting.
Fun. Oh, that's right.
Right, that massive vinyl Chessex map. So I got to use that that was fun. And we pulled out lots of miniatures, and the druid ended up summoning an earth elemental when they came across a stone golem. And so there was this fight between the earth elemental and the stone golem, which was pretty fucking epic too.
That's cool.
It's all the players are running around in this tomb, climbing over sarcophaguses and stuff. And this massive
kind of like a kaiju battle happening.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So what else? Festival of Fame Part 3. So that's the one with the guest DM, Caitlin Flower, who's a player from my Veingate Chronicles Actors Only stream. So she, being an actor and all, she ran us a 3-shot mini campaign, and we just finished that, which was also really fun. There was a lot of running around and fighting and trying to escape from a maze, terrifying monsters, and I spent most of that session invisible. Actually, I was playing a halfling sorcerer bard.
You were actually to play in that one.
Yeah, that was very cool. I was booked this week by a writers group to go and deliver a seminar about world building, honestly, strangely enough. So that was super fun, and they paid me. Yay.
Yeah.
So that's
cool. Always fun.
Yeah, I got some great publicity photos out of that. So yay for that. And you can see them there on my Facebook page. Pop over there if you want to. Open it in a new tab, though, because you better be listening.
You got to stay
right?
here.
You got to stay here, right? So there was that, and Vampire the Masquerade on Sunday night. We have filled up all our places. We're looking at starting possibly another campaign for that.
Wow.
On another night, because we're getting so full with players there, which is cool. It's really good. We're playing Chicago by night. We're playing V20, which is like the old edition. We're not playing the new edition, V5, which we tried out. We tried to port the game from one to the other. Wasn't very successful. Don't really like the new rules much. It looks really pretty, but it's not that cool. I mean, it's got some good things in it, and there's certainly stuff in there that I'm stealing, but overall the system is not as good as the original system, and it has stripped out the most core central mechanic from the game that I enjoy the most, which is this concept of nature and demeanor, which is just fantastic. I think
That's right. We had that really great conversation about nature and demeanor.
Right. And they stripped that out of the game. And honestly, that was the center of the game. That was the thing that was the best thing about the whole game, was this one mechanic.
That's
I don't know why they took
frustrating.
it out. It's very frustrating. So it left me kind of cold, going, whatever. So while we were playing Vampire, we also came up with an idea. Well, actually, it was between sessions. One of my players, Charlie, who is also a great player, plays in a number of our campaigns.
Does that happen to be Charlie T. Color in the chat?
Yeah, I think it would be. Yeah.
Hey, Charlie.
Hey, there you go. Hey, Charlie. Yeah, she came up with the idea that we could possibly like create characters for each other. I think not me, because I'm the DM, but they could do something along those lines, which we've been talking about. So yeah, we did sort of come up with a character for one of the players and sort of suggested it to him, and he was brave enough to try it out, which I thought was really cool. He it was a little bit, because it's Vampire the Masquerade, it's kind of a horror, sort of dark horror, scary, very personal kind of game. And it was a little bit too close to home for him, I think, in some ways, because he's been, well, I don't want to say too much about his personal life and stuff, but just the concept was a little bit too tightly sort of bound to where he's at in real life. And so we altered it a bit from there. So anyway, that was a great conversation. And the idea of players making character concepts for each other was fun, based on how they thought the other players might be able to play them.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's a fun idea, and it might be good for like a one shot or something where everyone makes a character and then gives it to somebody else to play.
I love that idea.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool too. I mean, I wouldn't want to get trapped in that as a campaign or something, because you might not like it. You really want to be able to exercise your own creativity, but yeah, doing it in a short form thing could be fun.
Oh man.
Do I have anything else to say? That's pretty much it. That's the main core of it. And yeah, welcome Charlie and Avery and whoever else is here, Michael and Jeremy, and anyone else that I've missed. So yeah, thanks for watching.
Yes.
And like and subscribe and all that stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
all that stuff. Thank you very much. I was just about to do it and you beat me to it.
Well, you can say it again.
No, you did a great job. That's all we need to do. We'll say it again, I'm sure, at some point. Yeah.
Okay, so
wonderful.
What's next? That's your week in games. It's my week in games.
Yeah.
It's also pretty much Charlie and Avery's week in games too. I don't know. They probably did some other stuff, but you know.
Yeah. Let me ask you a quick question real quick. For your paid sessions that you run, do they have to be, because you're doing it with a group, so does it have to be like weekly, or can you do like monthly, or how does that work?
Right. Well, it comes down to, is the group has to decide.
Okay, so it's up to the group.
Pretty much it. Okay. It's up to the group. I mean, I could run I do have a bi-weekly, or rather a bi-monthly group, where they play every 2 weeks on a Sunday at sort of 11 a.m. on a Sunday. And I have to say that anything that's less than weekly tends to become kind of dodgy in terms of its regularity. Like we end up missing sessions and then having to do double sessions and catch up sessions and stuff like that. And it sort of spills out over the rest of my schedule. So it's kind of, to be honest, it's annoying to do that. I think if it was a monthly session, that'd probably be just fine. But I don't know. I've only ever done it with this one group, and it just seems to me that, yeah. And also, I guess there's at least one player that lives in a different country. Most of them are all in New Zealand, and the other group, other players in Australia, and the time difference and stuff between the two groups. Sometimes they get confused with the schedule and stuff, and stuff happens. But honestly, they're getting better at that. And it's, at one point, we were all in the same country playing weekly, and it was working really well for 2 years. So I don't know. It's up to the group. I'm prepared to try anything, really. I think it can work. It's just a matter of making it work.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just curious. I usually don't have
Okay.
enough time in my life to do anything that's weekly, and bi-weekly even is a little scary for my schedule. So I was thinking like I still really
Right.
want to try vampire, but it would have to be monthly, and I would have to find a few folks that would also want to do it monthly. So
Right. Right.
still working on that,
Well, I
but
mean, we can make a list. Find some people. You
yeah.
never know. Charlie and Avery might be keen on something like that. You never know.
Hey, yeah, let me know, guys, folks.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay, well
so
let's go ahead and delve into the beginning part. Let's do it like a part 1 of our topic and a part 2 of our topic. We'll do part 1, then we'll head into a break, and then we'll do part 2. So, um for everyone listening, guys, we're getting to our topic way sooner than we usually get into it. Isn't it great?
I know. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, it is kind of a little bizarre.
It's kind of good, really. I think if you come to watch a thing about a thing, then you want to see the thing that they're talking about.
Right.
That
Yeah,
works.
instead of waiting for like an hour, right?
Right.
So let's not beat around the bush anymore. Although I do have a quick question. Do you know why you should not spell part backwards?
Is that a puzzle?
I don't. That's a good question. I think it's a trap.
Dun, dun,
Dun dun
dun.
dun. Dad joke out
Everyone's
of the way.
rolling their eyes.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about traps.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's
so
talk about traps.
let's dive in. How do you want to start this?
Okay. Well, it's a big topic, and it's also something I think we chose this topic, and one of the reasons I liked it and I voted for it was the fact that I don't use enough traps. And I don't know enough traps. And I've always kind of been, as a DM, kind of sparse with using them, and they can get really repetitive really easily. And that's partly because there's only so many sorts of traps, but also because different campaigns and scenarios sort of suit different styles of traps. You can have super elaborate traps, but they don't really fit into the sort of campaigns that I run, for example. So I tend to
Right.
use pretty simple traps or sometimes magical traps. I had a bit of a look through the Dungeon Master's Guide, and basically roundabouts page 120, 122, roundabouts there, 120 is the section on traps, and I've been through it a couple of times, and it's got a couple of simple sort of basic descriptions of them, and it explains to you how they work and such. So there sort of seems to be a couple of basic things outlined in the rules as written. As far as mechanics are concerned, you have detecting traps, avoiding traps,
Mm-hmm.
the damage that they cause, and then how you might disable them. And I guess the other thing that they might do, which you could sort of put in there with the damage, would include sort of control traps that grapple you or restrain you or create some sort of condition on you.
Okay.
So, you've got your classic sort of falling nets or your Ewok net trap type things that pull you up in the air and you're upside down hanging from a tree type of trap, where you're sort of making probably a dexterity saving throw to avoid in the first place, but it doesn't really do any damage. It just sort of restrains you. And then in terms of getting out of it, you might be making checks to like an acrobatics check or something to try and pull out a knife from your boot or something like that and cut
Yeah.
yourself down. And then you've got the time concerns. How long is it going to take you to do that? Because, on the one hand, you've got the trap, but on the other hand, you've got the fact that you're now restrained, and possibly somebody knows that you're there and they're coming for you. So there's tension. There could be tension in
Right.
that respect. So, things to keep in mind. If you're going to have traps, you can raise the stakes by restraining the players, or the characters rather, and giving them a clue that somebody or something set this trap and they're probably on their way. I mean, the most recent traps that I've personally invented were the players came across these tripwires with little bells on the end of them at each end in the forest. And these little bells, rather than being like, they were so small that they didn't really make a lot of noise. So the players were like, what the fuck is this about? They examined them and found they had like arcanic symbols on them and Orcan religious stuff. And those little Orcan bells tied to the ends of these tripwires. And of course, these set off an alarm spell for the orc blade of Ilnaval, who was hanging out in the orc camp that they were trying to invade, basically. And so they sent out the red fangs of Shargas with their giant bats to come and slay them. And of course, this all backfired on them because the players then ambushed the red fangs, but that's not the point. So that was a kind of a fun trap for me to play with. And I guess it's one of the first traps I've really gone to any great lengths or trouble to invent. So yeah, other sorts of traps we've got. I mean, I made a list of the types of traps that are really common in Dungeons and Dragons.
So real quick, so when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
say that your party came across them, they didn't trigger them. They saw them, or did they actually trigger them?
They were walking through. They were looking. I gave them perception checks, and one of them caught the tripwire.
Okay.
In fact, I think what happened. It's a little while ago now. I can't remember if he triggered it immediately. I think he did trigger it, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they did trigger it. But they were like, well, and I'm like, well, nothing happens. And they're like, well, fuck. Okay, what the hell? And then they go and examine it. And that's right. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. And they went and examined the bells and they're like, well, what the fuck? And then they were like, oh, this is some kind of alarm.
Yeah.
So that's when they set their ambush.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was fun. Yeah, so what do we got in the Dungeon Master's Guide? There are a lot of kind of simple traps like the collapsing roof, the falling net, pit traps, fire-breathing statues, poison darts. They're always fun. Poison needles that come springing out of walls from little holes in the walls. Often, you get to add the poison damage and the poison condition if they screw that up.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's good old Indiana Jones rolling stone down the corridor trap, which is always fun to try and avoid. It's getting a bit more elaborate now. And the DM's Guide, the last one listed here is the Sphere of Annihilation, which is pretty nasty, honestly. I would probably never use this except possibly in some high-level campaign in the Shadowfell or something like that. It seems a little bit too much. But
wait. So you're saying the Sphere of Annihilation, or what was it that you wouldn't use?
Yeah, the Sphere of Annihilation. I probably wouldn't use that. Probably not. I mean, not unless there was a very specific circumstance for it. What else have we got as far as traps are concerned? We have gas traps, gas coming out of holes in the walls or grills in the floor or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The good old blades and scythes that come out and try and chop you in half, which you have to try and avoid. We've got here's a great trap actually. Is the portcullis that divides the party.
So describe that a little bit deeper, just in case I'm not visualizing.
Right, you're going through the dungeon. You're in the tunnel in the dungeon. You're going down a corridor as a group. You're all fairly close together-ish, and then, or even if you're spread out. In fact, it probably works better if you're spread out. Sort of 5 feet between each player, and then a grill comes down, a portcullis, poof, right between in the middle of the party, dividing the party into 2 groups. Now, one side gets attacked and the other side can't do anything, or they're trying to help them through the portcullis, or they're trying to raise the portcullis when they get attacked from the other side.
Yeah.
So you've divided the group, you've divided their resources, and suddenly you've got a much more dynamic and interesting scene.
Yeah.
Credit where it's due, Matt Colville gave us this idea.
I thought it was going to go a different direction where you were forcing the party to split the party, which is what they always say don't do.
Right. Well, it does split the party.
Yeah.
It does actually split the party. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of does do that. But at the same time, it splits them in a way where they can still kind of communicate and they're still in the same location and they have the possibility of getting back together again if they can get rid of that portcullis somehow. Mm-hmm. They could use acid or magic or strength, or it could be a number of different ways. Then we've got the old magical traps. Mm-hmm. I actually am fond of magical traps, which is funnily enough, like wards, for example, where you have. I do these a fair few times on doors and chests, especially chests, where you go to open a chest, you're picking the lock. Back in the old days, it was you're picking the lock and a poison needle pops out and hits you in the hand, and now you've taken 2d4 points of damage and and now you're suffering the poison condition or something. I I think that's a little bit too mechanical and a bit too kind of convoluted. Whereas in a magical setting like D&D, I feel like a ward or something that just blasts you with psychic energy
Yeah.
is probably more realistic.
Yeah. We use that word
Weirdly enough.
lightly.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. I mean,
That's so
gas
funny.
out of a chest is quite realistic, perhaps. I mean, you could have a bladder of poison gas inside of a chest. There might not actually be anything in there except for the trap. The whole chest is the trap.
Right.
You know, mimics.
Of
I mean,
course.
mimics are basically a trap. I mean, and you can do anything with them. They can be anything. They could be your mouse. They could be your, whatever.
I actually did do. We had a wizard's tower that I had my party go through, and it was almost like each floor was just a single room. And if you get through the door, there's a stair that leads up to the next room, and each room was like a puzzle or a trap or something. And so it was so funny. They went into this one room, and there was nothing in that room except for the door on the other side. And so they're like, what's going on here? And then I rolled to see if anybody perceived that there were little pieces of broken off wood near the door. And then they realized that they didn't realize. They opened the door, and the door was a mimic. And so then they had to battle the door. And they went, oh, that's why there's pieces of wood on the floor.
Right.
So that was really fun.
Well, on the subject of magical traps, there are some great magical traps. Usually illusions are really great for this type of stuff, like the illusionary bridge.
The illusionary landscape. Yep.
Right, the illusionary landscape. The wall that is an illusion. You're just trapped inside a maze, and you can't see where the doors are because the doors have illusionary walls over them. Or illusionary treasure that draws you into the rooms. I mean, the thing about traps is they often work best when they have bait. And there's all sorts of great bait. One of the traps I was looking at this morning, I was doing some research, where you're in a location like, for example, again, let's say a dungeon or a maze, or even this could work outdoors. But in any case, the trap itself, all it does is spray pig's blood on you. And you're like, the players probably go, oh my God, it's poison, it's magic, it's going to do something to me, but it doesn't do anything. It's just pig's blood.
Yeah.
But then the wolves are released.
It's the lure. Yeah.
Right, the wolves come and sends them into a feeding frenzy.
I'm taking notes. I don't know if you can hear my pen scrawling. I'm taking notes.
No, I can't, but I believe you. Yeah. So then we've got room traps like fire, like you go into the room and the little nozzles jet fire into the room. Or it could be magic is probably better, because that sounds like you need like a tank of fuel and some kind of ignition system. And I don't know, it sounds dodgy to me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use that. But yeah, like a magical fire trap. The good old spikes out from the walls, possibly the walls closing in.
Yeah.
We've seen that 1,000 times, the floor squishing you. We talked about gas, acid, like an acid bath room could work. And you could have clues to these sorts of things too, of course. You know, when you're looking around the room, there's holes in the wall. What do you think those are? There's remnants of dead corpses, bodies, bones, old dead stuff. These are your clues. Yeah. It's good, I think, to telegraph traps to players. But again, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but this is all about context. So we'll come back to context in a second. So as far as what other sorts of traps, we've got arrows and darts, cage traps, where you find yourself in a cage. You might not look like a cage, but you go into a room and bang, the door slams and you're trapped. Then we've got the simple traps, bear traps, the obvious stuff, the things that we see in real life sorts of traps. And then, again, going back to the magical traps, magical choking vines. That's a great trap.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
In a forest, and spider webs are essentially traps too.
I don't use spider webs enough, because I feel like if I used anything with spider webs, they immediately become suspicious. So I just need to start throwing spider webs everywhere as like red herrings.
Yeah. I mean, look, the thing is, I throw in giant spiders quite often. And the thing about giant spiders is they're not actually that hard to kill.
Yeah.
They're not very scary, really. I mean, they look scary, they sound scary, but as far as like challenge rating is concerned, they're fucking easy to kill. They're amped up goblins on legs, multiple legs. So yeah, you can use giant spiders, and that can explain your spider webs, and it still gives them a bit of a thrill. And the fact that they think they know what's coming, and they do, they get a little bit of a, "Ooh, look at us, we knew what was going on."
Right.
But then you throw in like an extra trap into that once in a while after you've set the tone with it,
Yeah.
over a period of time. And I have to say that is the good thing about playing more regularly, is that you get more of an opportunity to set the tone and to have these long burn sort of sequences or plot effects. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, you get to seed your clues a little bit more
Yeah.
regularly. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can slow the game down.
Mm-hmm.
The game, because if you play, the less regularly that you play, and I find this with the Frostmourne Crows, we play every 2 weeks. You have to have action every week.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's going to get boring and people won't remember it as well. Whereas when we play weekly or even more often, you can have multiple sessions with no action, and it's all role playing or politics or what have you.
And they know it's okay because they know it's going to be some point soon.
It's building to something.
Yeah,
it's always building to something. So now, triggering traps. I'll probably come back to a few other trap ideas, but we'll just quickly go over the triggering traps that they've suggested in the DM's guide.
Right. And while you're doing that, I just want to tell anybody in the chat, if you have been part of a particularly interesting or nasty trap, I would love for you guys to share it in the chat.
Yeah, I am really keen on hearing other people's trap ideas. Honestly, I think that would be fantastic. I definitely want to learn more traps.
Yeah, now that we're talking about it, I'm starting to think that maybe I don't use traps as much as I could too.
Right. Water.
Uh-oh. Hey, folks, it looks like we lost Russell. He'll probably be back here any second. What I will say, it's a good thing I took notes while he was talking. What I will say is that his bell trap with the ambush, what I love about that, and if you're a DM and you're trying to figure out how to put a trap in your game, just checking technological difficulties here. Okay. If you're going to put a trap in your game, something complex like that, allow your players to catch it. You are back now. Sorry, I was filling the silence while I was waiting for you to come back.
No worries.
Nothing.
Honestly, did nothing.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why that happens. But so I was talking about your bell trap with the ambush, and what I really like about that and what I want to have DMs take away from that is you set your traps, and maybe what we're learning here is we should use traps more often. However, you want to allow for certain instances where your party will discover the trap, like you said, so that they kind of get the, ooh, look at us, we're cool, we figured it out. But also I love the ambush thing because it really gets your players vested in the action. If they have a moment to plan together and like say, you're going to do this and you guys do that and we're going to do this all together, and like they're really vested in that moment. And that's a really key element, I think, that everyone should take away from this.
Absolutely. Now, I was just about to come across trap triggers. These are the most obvious and simple ones. They're like uneven flagstones, and these are all clues too, right? Pressure plates, kind of the same thing with weight limits. So something small like a rat might run over the pressure plate and not set it off, but something large like a elven paladin wearing splint mail might, in fact, be heavy enough to cause the sensor plate to drop an inch and set off the spiky wall trap, or the room starts filling with acid water and spiders. I don't know, water and spiders. That sounds a bit much.
They're acid resistant spiders.
Acid resistant aquatic spiders.
Yes.
There you go. Right.
Like those, what are those spiders? The water striders, is that what they're called? And they're on top of the water.
Right. Actually, that's pretty cool.
I know, right? I was thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, pat myself on the back. I like it.
we might have to homebrew some of those up a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the next sort of thing I wanted to sort of briefly talk about is the idea of the players themselves making traps. Because that's also a possibility. I mean, the players can build traps. They can make pit traps, for example. It's not hard to do. I mean, it takes time, but it's not hard to do. You ever seen Conan the Barbarian?
Yes.
The movie, right? And they know that the bad guys, Thulsa Doom, is coming, and he's going to bring an army of bad guys with him. And so they spend a whole montage sequence, sort of at the end of Act Two, building traps for them. And there's some great ideas in there, wound up things with ropes and spikes and stuff that swing around with boulders hanging on them for weight and so on. And then you get to see them all kind of go off, which is cool. Spiky palisades, and you knock people off the side of something and they roll down into the palisades. That's, that I don't know if these all qualify exactly as traps, but there's certainly some good ones in there.
Yeah.
Now we've got some fire-breathing statue traps. It also occurred to me sort of weird magic traps, like rooms that have strange gravity in them, for example. Now, that's not something I would usually use, except again if it was in some kind of interplanar type of thing happening where you weren't in the prime material plane. Something like that could work. Traps that...
Oh, sorry. You're a Critical Role fan, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I've seen season 1. I haven't watched too much of anything past season 1. I just didn't have time really, but I did enjoy it. I do like them.
The animated show or the D&D
oh no, the
show?
original.
The original.
The
Okay.
D&D show. Yeah.
Okay, so you saw when he used spoiler for anyone who's going to watch it. I'm not going to spoil the plot, but there was a corridor where gravity seemed to be kind of turned off and they were trying to get through the corridor. Do you remember this? And then they started floating up like towards the ceiling, I believe. And there was some mechanism on the far end which I think turned the gravity off. But what I remember, or what I recall from that, was that there were like undead either on the ceiling or on the floor. I can't remember. So regardless, I think they were either heading towards floating into the undead or once they turned the gravity off, falling into the undead, which I think is just great.
Then there's falling damage as well, right? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of traps that involve falling, pit traps, especially if they've got spikes in them, or, long distance falls and so on, landing on each other, landing on monsters, landing in a pit of snakes. Charlie just touched on something that I wanted to mention too. She said cursed magic items are something that she'd consider a trap, which I was going to mention that. Items, so you can have objects that the players can either touch, tamper with, pick up, steal, move, approach, or what have you, that may or may not be sentient, or that's a whole can of worms unto itself. But items that can cast spells, like for example, you could have something in a room that cast fairy fire near the entranceway. So as the players come through a doorway, they're automatically fairy fired. They'd have to make a saving throw.
I love that idea. I've never really thought about using fairy fire against my players, but that is
right.
Very
right.
good.
I mean, the players use it all the time. I mean, everything the players do to me, I take notice. I don't have to learn all the rules and all the spells and all the stuff. So the easiest way to learn D&D is to watch what players do and steal their shit. And throw it back at them. Preferably throw it back at a different group, so they're not getting the same shit back at them. That's the advantage of what I do, is I can steal each other's ideas and throw them at each other. So they don't really know that. But Sunfall's fighting the Frostmoor Crows. Actually, no, just kidding.
That's awesome.
It's not true at all. Okay, so what else we got? Oh, right. So caltrops, and we're talking about player-made traps. Great scene in Burning Path where Avery's character, I think it was Avery's character, one of you guys, dumped a bunch of caltrops on the ground for the what was it, a quasit that was chasing you. You didn't know it was a quasit at the time, I don't think, but they figured it out when the quasit suddenly slipped over and appeared from being invisible, or something to that effect. Can't remember exactly how it worked, but caltrops, and you can use ball bearings, you can have proper caltrops, that type of stuff, all pretty fantastic. Avery's saying, remember the room in the bank door of the market, the one with the book and maybe a mirror, the market dozen place. Right. Yes, that was complicated. I'm not going to talk about that one right now. That is an extraordinarily complicated magical scenario. I'm
Yeah.
not going to call it a trap. It's a scenario. But yes, that was a cool one. And it certainly had everybody quite confused and confounded. What about being trapped inside a gelatinous ooze or the cave worm? Yeah, I mean, I've seen situations where, oh, you pull the lever and a gelatinous cube lands on you,
Mm-hmm.
right, from the roof.
Yeah.
Or you fall into a gelatinous cube or something like that. Nasty.
And now I'm trying to
Um,
remember if this, I don't know if I saw this on a Matt Colville episode or if
mm,
this was something else, but in conjunction with your corridor with the gate that comes down, I think I
right,
remember seeing something about like if the gate comes down, there's players on this side, and now there's a gelatinous cube coming this
right,
way. Yeah,
right,
that's
right. And
a
the
really
cube
great
can go
way.
through the gate, actually. That's
Yeah.
that's curious. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about how do you decide what traps to use?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of traps should you use? Because there's lots and lots and lots of them. Um, so context, obviously, is this is essentially what we're talking about, and so this is going to come down to, in my view, your NPCs. Who are your NPCs? What do you know about your NPCs? If your big bad evil guy is an arch lich, it's going to have different kinds of traps to if your big bad evil guy is I don't know, a fiend or a wizard or possibly a mob boss or a king or something like that, or I don't know, a succubus. These are all very different types of creatures with different aesthetics, different resources, different magical powers, different economical sort of powers, and so on. Um, is this in a dungeon? Is this in a swamp? Is this in a house? Is this in a interstellar fucking starship? I don't know, whatever. So yeah, so those types of things are pretty important, and the culture of the NPCs that we're talking about is going to affect that. You know, orc traps are probably more brutal, more force kind of based. They're going to be spikes and spears and possibly wooden stuff with maybe ropes, but not too mechanical. Whereas, you know, a gnomish trap might be super intricate, made of very small moving parts with magical aspects and elements to it as well. So, you know, there's obviously aesthetic differences between the sorts of traps you're using and the kinds of creatures, monsters, NPCs, antagonists that you're dealing with.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that is largely me. I
It's
think I'm
it's
just
kind of
yeah,
like, I mean, I when you're talking about context, the first thing that came to mind was the movie Home Alone, right? Like, so the young kid is home alone, and so he builds traps around his entire home. But consider the context, he's a kid, so his traps are
right,
like with toy cars and paint cans, and
right,
um
right,
there's that comedic element to it, but he's using everything
yeah,
around from the home, so you don't want to put traps in your encounter that don't
mm,
necessarily vibe with where
right,
they are and who's
right,
setting them, because
exactly,
then it kind of takes
yeah.
everybody out of it.
Yeah, and you kind of get that funhouse dungeon kind of scenario where you can have all that weird stuff, traps that are so elaborate that nobody would really have the time or energy to put to use to build these things just for this one situation. You know, they're like really over the top. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, anyway, please. Oh,
uh
yes. And they don't have to be lethal. That's what I was going to say. You don't have to make lethal damaging traps. You could have sleeping gas,
mhm.
you know, stuff like that can also work. Things that create conditions, um, especially with magical traps. Pretty much any spell in the book, you can turn into a trap in some way or another,
Yeah.
you know.
The
Um,
other thing I would probably add is consider your party,
mhm.
because and
Yeah.
maybe you tell me, but I feel like a majority of the traps, I don't know, by default it feels like the majority of the traps you have a dex saving throw. It is
Right.
the saving throw. And I feel like,
Typically, yeah.
yeah, one, so that you're not boring your party, you should maybe change it up so that the traps are built in such a way that they require a different saving throw. So it's not always
Right.
the same
Yeah.
person who's saving from it, or, you know, the same people
Yeah.
who are failing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's where I was going with that is, yeah, you don't.
That also helps you in terms of choosing how to mitigate that too. You might give the character with the lowest dexterity some kind of magic item that influences their dexterity, you know.
Mhm.
You can think about how to reward the players based on how badly they do at their checks.
Yeah.
um, that kind of thing too. I was also going to mention the like falling walls, falling entrances, collapsing tunnels. These are good traps as well.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, we've all seen in any number of movies and things where the floor starts falling away and there's only a certain pathway and you have to run across the steps, which you have to jump from step to step, and each step collapses as you're trying to jump to the next one. You know, that kind of stuff. And where you have multiple parts in a trap too. I didn't talk about complex traps actually.
Mhm.
Yeah, where you have multiple aspects to it. Avery talks about a trap with an intelligence saving throw to disarm it.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Um, and the DM's guide talks about having sort of 3 levels of trap, basically: setback traps, dangerous traps, and deadly
Deadly.
traps.
Yeah.
Um, and then they rate these traps in the DM's guide based on sort of level 1 to 4, 5 to 10, 11 to 16, and 17 to 20. Where for setbacks, like at level 1, they would do like 1d10 at level. For a setback, a dangerous trap might do 2d10, and a deadly trap might do 4d10. And there's a sort of table that sort of shows you exponentially how to manage the theoretical amount of damage that a trap might do. So if you need guidelines for building these traps,
Yeah.
they're there.
I
Yeah.
also like thinking of traps in stages, in the sense of, just like you were talking about telegraphing the traps, you know, some traps I think it's fair that, you know, depending on who built it or what the type of trap is, that your players won't see it. And that's okay.
Right.
But I do like the idea of, if there's the possibility that they could see it or potentially like trigger it, like I
Right.
think Matt Mercer does it, where it's like, oh, you step on a brick and you hear a click, and instead of immediately saying, here's the damage you take, he gives
Right.
them a moment to like, okay, you hear a click, what are
Consider.
you
Right.
doing about it? And he gives
Yeah.
them a chance to
Yeah.
try to get out of it, which
Yes.
is a great opportunity for
Well,
people to get really
actually,
creative.
on that subject, when you do that, a great trick is to say something like this: you step on the flagstone and it makes a click. What do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do
And
you
now there's
do?
a sandglass timer. You've got until the sandglass runs out to answer the question. You know, you've got to figure it out fast.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I mean, even better than that, in terms of really putting pressure on the players, you go,
Yep.
right? So you're counting down and they've got to give you an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't give you an answer, they get a deck save.
Yeah.
And then Matthew Colville talks about failing forward all the time. So you fail the first saving throw, you get a chance to try again, but now the stakes are higher.
Right.
So you've slipped into the trap, but you've caught onto the edge of it. Now you've got to make another saving throw not to fall, and you're trying to climb out, and that's going to take another check.
Yeah.
So multiple checks. Now, they also talk about, I've seen people talking about how you can have traps that activate on their own initiative count. So I'm not quite sure how that would work, but
I
it's
think that's
interesting.
kind of like the way I would interpret that is like a layer action. Like
Right.
if they're stuck in a room and maybe there's a
Oh,
puzzle involved. Okay, so you remember what it is?
I just remembered how it works, and I
Okay.
remember now that I've actually done this. So Avery and Charlie will remember the scene in the aquifer, just above the aquifer, the day on the session after the fighting the golem, where they climbed out of the aquifer and the river was flooding and it was getting wider. So every initiative count, I redrew the map so that the water was wider. And you can do that with a room of water or an acid filling trap or something like that, where on every 0 count on initiative, the top of the round, you add a new difficulty or sort of more difficult terrain, or some new danger arises. The stakes rise every round on the initiative count. And I think the last thing that I want to talk about is, and this is especially true for magical traps, but any other trap might have something about it too, passwords and safe passage. So whoever built the trap possibly needs to get past the trap from time to time. So they might have some sort of password or some means of getting through it. Could involve a secret door, or, and now I'm going to roll into your topic, there could be a puzzle, and then we get into puzzle traps.
Yep.
So at that, I suppose, unless anyone's got anything else to add to the subject of traps, which could go on forever probably.
Well, Charlie made a comment, and I don't know what the context is, so I thought you might, because I'm curious what that means.
Social traps. So a social trap where you've essentially been socially engineered into something. I mean, we had, during our vampire session on Sunday night, we have a situation where Charlie's character is a hacker, and her network got hacked by another hacker who's at least as good as she is. And then at the same time as that was happening, we had a police raid on their nightclub. And so during the police raid, they get hacked, and she gets this message saying, you know, who are you? What's your name? You know, basically trying to find out more information about Charlie's character. And then when she sort of didn't respond appropriately, according to the antagonist, he's like, well, give me $5 million and I'll make it stop.
Wow.
So, you know, then they were sort of scrambling to think, well, can we pull out $5 million out of our asses? Do we have that kind of cash? And are we prepared to give it away? And can our egos cope with that? You know, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, that was kind of, I don't know if you consider that to be a social trap. Do you have anything more specific in mind? Because I mean, I know in Vampire, I actually do use a few traps, like mines, tripwires with explosives, exploding doors are quite common, stuff like that. I mean, especially in Vampire, it tends to be fire-related traps because vampires are vulnerable to fire.
Right.
So yeah, but social traps, where someone, for example, they might try and shake your hand, but in fact what they're trying to do is use some form of auspex or psychometry to read your find out something about you magically, basically psychically discover who you are or learn something about you simply by shaking your hand. Or there's a lot of things in Vampire, because in Vampire the Masquerade, if you drink another vampire's blood 3 times on 3 separate occasions, you become bloodbound to them. So setting up people to drink your blood without them knowing is quite a common thing. So putting blood in other people's drinks and things like that is quite a common thing. Or convincing someone to drink your blood because maybe there's been a gunfight or something and somebody's been injured, and you're like, well, you can have some of my blood, it will help heal you.
Yeah.
You know, and it does help heal them, but it also makes them 1 point bloodbound to you.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
You know, that type of thing. So I don't know if that's what Charlie's
to consider.
Sort of getting at. Yeah. So you take the vulnerabilities of the players and consider how you can build traps around that. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess social traps, I'll think more about it on that, Charlie, and maybe come back to it. But I do need to hand over to Amber to talk about puzzles.
Well, before we talk about puzzles, we're going to go ahead and take our break because we have a really great music video, a couple of really great music videos to share with you. Alamance is back. I don't know if you remember when we showed the Alamance video. It might have been about a month ago or so. But I love the animation in their videos. So if they happen to be listening, whoever your animator is or your artist, love it because it just goes so well with your music. And then we also have Arcane Anthem, and we also have our deception checks with our own Dungeon Studios voice actors. So after the break, we will come back and we will talk about puzzles.
Right.
All right.
Excellent.
So
Looking forward to
everybody
that.
kick in there or hang in there, and we will see you guys in just a little bit.
Who are you? What do you think you're doing here? Ships, you say? Well, sure, there's wrecked ships all over these icebergs. And yes, we may have had a hand in it, but I assure you it is all for a good cause. It is all to feed the demon of the icebergs, of course. It is our holy duty to do so. And although it may come at a cost, well, for those other people, we have been entrusted with this task and shall see it done by whatever means necessary. Thinking to stop us? Good luck. Oh no, not because of us, because of the demon itself. Oh, do you feel that? Now you've done it. She must be waking, and I bet she's hungry. Travel to the frigid setting of the Guardian Icebergs and more unique settings from the world of Interon. Follow our socials to keep up to date on all upcoming projects.
Come on, cleric, please cast remove curse on me. I swear that I'm chafing. Get this armor off of me. I'll start praying to your deity. He says, ooh, get this armor off me. Take a short rest after the fight. The kobolds were vicious, but we won despite of our greedy rogue loot and all in sight. Oh, and now we have cursed armor. The rogue never knows better. Our barn is dry. Casting a dispel magic. Barbarian just failed a strength check. Our paladin says she won't lift a finger. The rogue was panicked and said,
Hello?
Hi, my name is Jesse Finkler, and I'm calling about the horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, now recently we had to put old Cooter Pooter down. God damn shame. Anywho, we're looking to get up north next month and put a hurting on old Jeremiah and them dang Amish at the buggy races. So we're looking for a new horse, and we saw your post on Craigslist. So can that horse pull a buggy?
The previous owners said that the people that had her before they got her, so 2 owners ago, said that she did.
Perfect.
I would honestly be surprised if she does.
Is this a good, hard-working horse?
She will. Now, she does not know a lot. She's green.
Oh, that's fine. I could teach horses.
Yeah,
I could teach them how to run and jump.
I had her sold the other night to a guy with a 13-year-old little girl doing dressage and jumping.
Dressage? That sounds fancy. Oh, she sounds like a wild one. Now tell me, does this horse come with shoes?
No, she's barefoot.
Okay. What is, let's say, the jousting ability? Do I get any pluses for riding the horse?
I mean, she will ride for sure.
Yeah. Well, hot dang. I would like to paint the number 2 on the side of her. That's my old racing number from the 80s.
Mhm.
So when can I get and take a look at this horse?
Whenever you want. You're in Texas, right?
Right. Yep.
I mean, she's a good drive from you. We're in Mississippi.
Well, the good news is I have another horse. He's very fast, and I can get there in a hop, skip, and a jump. I appreciate your time. You have a fantastic evening.
You too.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Telling tales from the time I could. They carried me to sleep and a maid so that I could stay underneath. I'm locked in tight. No, I don't wanna let it go. Don't wake me up. So now I'm stuck in the animation. Can't seem to feel it. I'm not watching my body moving. I don't know what I can do now. It keeps me farther away. It takes the life out of me. It keeps me farther away. I don't know what I can be now. I don't know what I can be now.
It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done. Marred by dust, sweat, blood, neither no victory nor defeat.
So now I'm stuck in the animation. Can't seem to feel a thing. I'm just watching my body moving. I don't know what I can do now. It keeps me farther away. It takes the life out of me. It keeps me farther away. I don't know what I can be now.
Hello there, adventurer. I see you're interested in the vast wealth of knowledge I've acquired and stored over the years. That's fantastic. Come in, out of the sand and the sun, take a look around. It's not every day such an interesting and willing group of guests stumble upon my library. Feel free to explore. It's been years since the last group came through here, and they looked much less promising than you. I'm sure you'll find all sorts of interesting things, if you know where to look. But be warned, this library holds more than just books and scrolls, and only the worthy are allowed to leave with the knowledge that they find. So I suppose the real question is, do you have what it takes to impress me?
I keep my rules to myself. Fudge a couple numbers so the body don't run out of health. Always the perfect TPK, watch him bleed. It's a lot of power to wield. Ooh, gotta balance these conflicts. How other players gonna handle taking licks now? Not to end their fun till the game is done. Ooh, it's a pleasure to inflict out. Get up big and watch the players start to trip out. When they feel they've won, hit 'em with a stun.
And we're back. I almost forgot to unmute myself. That
Welcome
happens
back.
a lot. Welcome back, everyone. I am so glad that you guys stuck around. We are getting ready to discuss puzzles. We spent some time talking about traps, and now we're going to start talking about puzzles. Why? What's the difference? What the way I like to think of it is, traps and puzzles kind of go hand in hand a lot. I mean, you can throw some traps in puzzles, you can throw puzzles along in with your traps. The way I like to think about it, you correct me if I'm wrong, traps feel like there's an immediate consequence, where even if it comes in stages, I feel like traps, there's something you trigger and there's an immediate consequence, whereas with
Usually,
puzzles, there is a mystery to solve. And with puzzles in a game, in a tabletop role-playing game, I feel like a puzzle is a short-term mystery. It's not there's mysteries that you can put into your game that are like long-term, over the arc of the story, but I don't really consider that a puzzle so much as it's in this one session.
Mystery.
Yeah, this period of time, this short-term mystery that you have to solve that involves, I don't know, clues or what have you. What do you think? Do you think I'm kind of nailing those, or do we need to clarify that a little bit more?
Overall, I agree. I think that traps, they don't have to necessarily be immediate. I mean, you can have a trap that, for example, you step on a plate, nothing happens. You're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Okay. But
now it's a puzzle.
Somewhere else in the dungeon, the gates opened and just let the wolves out.
Yeah.
So it could be something like that. It could be something where you don't know what it's done. But that does border onto a puzzle, doesn't it? In so many ways.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And I think also traps tend to be about some sort of negative consequence, where puzzles can be fun. They can be a test. They could not necessarily have to hurt you.
Yeah.
More often than not, they probably do, and thusly they're kind of combined. Like, you might have a situation where you are trapped, and now you have to solve the puzzle to get out of the trap. Or, I mean, puzzles also border on things like cryptography too. Do you remember I told you about how in Sidarial, my campaign world, bags of holding you have to name the objects that you put in them, otherwise you can't get them out.
Yeah.
So almost every bag of holding is going to have somewhere a list, and it may or may not be called a list, but oftentimes, I had a group of players who called the list from the bag. The list appears, but it's written in Draconic and it's encrypted. So this was a puzzle designed to find objects in a bag. It was basically so they could get the treasure.
Right.
There was no negative, outrightly obvious negative consequence towards that, at least not at first, until they realized what they pulled out turned out to be something highly wanted by the powers that be. So, there are gray areas perhaps between these two polar opposites, but I think overall the way you've described it pretty much sums it up in the most.
Yeah, I do like that you added the there's the negative consequence versus the positive consequence, or gray area consequence, if you will.
Right,
Because
right.
I mean,
It
a
doesn't
trap is
have to
called a
be.
trap. If it was a good thing, I don't know that people would call them traps. It would have a different
It'd be
name,
a
right?
surprise,
Surprise! There you go. So
a happy
anyway,
surprise trap.
so here's the thing: if you are, because here's the thing: I feel like I struggled with the definition of puzzles and traps in the beginning. And as
Right.
a DM, I think, or especially being a newer DM, I think people might want to understand better like what these things mean. So I want to give a few examples that you might recognize in like pop culture or other things outside of tabletop role playing, right?
Right,
Number
right.
one, the old legend of the Sphinx with is it Odysseus? Is that how, the Greek legend
Right.
where there was the Sphinx had a riddle, and if you could figure out the answer to that riddle, then something good happened, or you were allowed to live, or I can't remember the
Right.
exact lore, but
Right.
I'm lots
Right.
of people have heard of that. Legend of the Rings, Legend of the Rings. Somebody take my nerd card now. Why is the internet not yelling at me? Lord of the Rings.
I thought it
And
was some sort of anime or something when you said Legend of the Rings. It might have been
no,
like Legend of the Nine Rings
my
or
brain just stroked out, and I could not believe I said that. Anyway, Lord of the Rings with what's his name? See, I just have a horrible memory. This is my problem. The guy with he was talking with Gollum, and they were going back and
right,
forth with
right.
riddles.
Bilbo Baggins
Bilbo, thank you.
and Gollum. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yes,
I remember some of those things too. There was like 40 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. What am I?
exactly. Yes,
Teeth.
yes,
And
perfect
this
example.
thing, all things it devours, birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, and grinds hard stones to meal, slays kings
This is
and
the actor
ruins
in you.
towns, and beats high mountains down. What am I?
Love it.
Time.
See,
Right. I
now, if
remember
I
those.
were you as a DM, I would definitely lean into riddles because you do that very well.
Oh, I just happen to remember those ones from. It's odd. I had a really almost photographic memory in my childhood, and now it's just shot to pieces. So I used to be able to recall huge, vast chunks of text just from reading them once, or movie lines and stuff like that. Like I have, like most of Pulp Fiction is in my brain,
My
but now
my
I
brain is a
can't do
weird mishmash of Swiss cheese because the only thing I remember from that long ago is like old rap lyrics from the 90s or something.
Right. It's all about what you put in and how much empty space you've got. I had a
Right.
lot of empty space, so
Yeah.
the stuff that stuck was nonsense.
Okay, so for the horror fans like me, the Saw films, of course, almost every single Saw film, those are all some form of very horrific puzzle where
Puzzles,
if you
right?
don't figure it out, then you get your arm chopped off or something.
Right.
But you can
Nasty.
definitely lean into those for, something to put into your game. Escape rooms, if you've ever been in an escape room, those are a lot of fun and usually involve groups working together to find a way to get out. It's not just a single person event.
Right.
The movie Labyrinth, if you remember, there was the scene where she was faced with the two the two guys, and
Classic.
one of them's lying and one of them's telling the truth, and then they tell you
Right.
something and you have to figure out which doorway is the right doorway.
And it's some really sort of complex logic right there,
Yeah,
figuring that out. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
boy. I have
Uh,
not had my Wheaties because my brain is like words are failing me now.
right.
Process of elimination. That's what I was going to
Process
say.
of
Using the
elimination.
process of elimination to solve a puzzle.
Right.
For any
Sometimes you only get
legends,
3 chances or something too.
yeah, exactly. And that's where you can maybe throw in a trap is, yeah, you get like 3 chances and then all of a sudden something springs off because you failed and now
Right.
you're trapped in a different section of the dungeon. For players of Legend of Zelda, if you played Ocarina of Time, I believe it's Ocarina of Time. It might be the next one after. There's a water temple. And that water temple had various levels where you had to raise the water like up to this level to be able to access this area, but then you were locked out of this area. So then now you have to change the level of the water to be able to access this other area, and you're locked out of and
Cool.
so it's a series of raising the water, lowering the water, this height, this height, this height in this order, and then now you can get into the next area. Now that is very
Right.
complex, but that is a wonderful example of how to make an entire dungeon a puzzle.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's
then
cool.
yeah, isn't it so cool? I actually did that to my players. I can talk about that later, but I literally took that temple and just reskinned it for my own water temple, and it was perfect.
Right.
And then just for, I mean, everybody's got a smartphone, I would think at this point. Maybe you don't, but you at least know that there are games on smartphones that are like Bejeweled, what's the Candy Crush, Sudoku,
Right.
all of
Right.
those are a form of a puzzle game. And so you can take all of these examples and translate them into your game in one way or another.
Can I just interrupt there on the subject of smartphones? Some of the players here, I know Charlie will remember this. We did a puzzle where they had to break into a cell phone.
Really?
And so they had to guess the password of the cell phone. So I gave them an image of a cell phone with alphanumerical keypad on it, because it was set in 1999 at the time. And they had to, using the letters on the cell phone, because each number has 3 letters on the alphanumeric
that's
thing.
right.
And so they had to guess the numbers by making words that could only fit into, 6 letters or something like that, 6 characters. Right. She remembers. And they did guess it. They figured it out. It took them a little while, but it was great. They figured that out.
That's
I was
a
very proud
great
of them.
puzzle, yeah. Especially
Yeah.
for those of us in the generation of pagers where we had to use that alphanumeric
Right.
system to text people.
Right.
So
Sorry.
yeah, those are just some examples if you are looking for ideas. And now we can kind of break it down into the different types of puzzles, right? We talked about riddles. That was kind of the OG of puzzles, are riddles.
Right.
We could do word letter puzzles in a game where, like you mentioned, there's a cryptogram, there's some kind of a combination of letters or numbers or a pattern that, if you were to guess it, will allow you to progress to the next area. I did something similar to what you did. I had my players at a gala, and they were actually trying to perform a heist during the gala. And so their rogue went down into the basement, and there was a series of different combinations. It was like the first combination, I can't remember, was like a number combination, and then that door opened, and now you're set with another puzzle, and that one was a letter combination, and then proceeding. Well, so the letters, they had like kind of like a walkie-talkie system so they could talk to each other, and they were like, okay, well, now I need letters. What letters am I putting in here? Like, there's no clues down here at all. So they were the rest of the party was up in the gala asking questions, trying to get information. And lo and behold, it was like the daughter of the Earl. He loves her so much, and there's pictures of her everywhere. And what was her name? It was the exact number of letters that went into the safe. So they were able to figure that kind of puzzle out, send it to the safe cracker, and then the safe cracker figured it out. So,
Yes, safes are great for that sort of thing, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. So word puzzles, letter puzzles, word searches, crosswords, any way to kind of throw that into your game would be fun.
There's a huge amount of stuff you can draw from video games. There's so many clever puzzles in video games.
Yeah.
You
could literally, and I will tell you, even if you have heavy gamers in your group, if you reskin that, they will never know that that you lifted it literally from Legend of Zelda and put it. None of my players figured it out, and I have one player in my group who is an avid Legend of Zelda fan, and did not guess it until I told him. So they'll never know.
Avery saying the National Treasure movies with Nicolas Cage, lots of puzzles.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes.
Don't forget Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Okay, so logic puzzles. I had just as an example, so I had my son play in this one room dungeon kind of thing where there was a well, and boy, I'm gonna really not remember how to do this, but it was something to the effect of he needed water in another room, and the well had no water, and so it was a series of trying to figure out how to get water to the well, and he kind of had to use his logic to understand, like, okay, if I crank this wheel, that will put water. Again, it's kind of a series that'll put water into the well. Then I can use this cup that I found in this room over here and tie it to the rope near the well, and now bring the cup down, pull the water up. Now I can bring water to the other room. So it's kind of a series of like just trying to logic your way, kind of like an escape room even. You know, there's a series of steps, and or I think another probably good example of a logic puzzle is like you have, you know, I guess it's one of those, the process of elimination puzzles where you have a series of clues. The person you're looking for always wears red. The person that you're looking for goes to the market on Mondays. The person you're looking for, you know, and so you put all these series of clues together, and if you can logic it out, then you can figure out who the person is you're looking for.
Right.
Right. Mazes and labyrinths, obviously. You could have a labyrinth with a minotaur, and you got to have a way to figure out how to get out. Maybe there's clues. Maybe there's arcana, like barely visible arrows, you know.
I mean, actually, when you say that, that's interesting, because I just did this thing last night with Burning Path, where I was saying they got access to this new complex that they've been given by their patron, and as they were being taken in there, one of the guys that was taking them down there, an NPC, he said to them, "Can anybody in the group cast the light cantrip?" And a couple of them put their hands up, and he said, "Okay, well, there are markings on the walls that can only be seen with the light cantrip." That will show you the way down here, and they were painted using very expensive ancient ink that is no longer in supply. So you can't get this ink anymore, basically. But it's like a black light. If you use the light cantrip, it creates like a black light effect, and you can see the markings that were painted there.
You know what I love about that is that it makes the cantrip a little more like useful, you know, like people who are like, ugh, cantrips, but like you need that cantrip.
And everybody can see in the dark these days too. Everyone's got dark vision, 60 feet, you know? So why would you take the light cantrip? Well, now here's a good reason, because there's this thing that's in the game setting that can be used sort of on a, you know, bigger scale now. I can use that same thing in other places and locations where people wouldn't think to look for it, but now they have a reason to take the light cantrip.
I love that. Now I can see so my husband in the chat said never-ending rugs, and that I feel like that might have been more as a trap, but it did kind of end up being a puzzle for them to figure this out, because this was in the very first room of that wizard tower I told you about, where each room was its own puzzle or trap kind of thing, and they would proceed up the stairs, and then now the next room. Well, so the very first room, there was a very big rug on the floor right in front of the staircase, and they all proceeded to walk over the rug. And so I proceed to describe that they are walking up the stairs, and they're walking up the stairs, and they're still walking up the stairs, and they're still walking up the stairs. And finally, after a while, they were looking at each other like, what's happened? Why aren't we going anywhere? So then it took a series of checks for them to kind of figure out that they're not really going anywhere. And then finally, and the only way to get off the rug was they had to be able to like pass that check to figure it out, and they had to step off the rug backwards. Like they had to go back this way. And so
go forward. Yeah.
Right. And so then, what really bit me in the ass afterwards was that they rolled that rug up and they took it with them, and they ended up using it on my NPC in the future. I did not think about that. So, but
I did something similar. Something similar with a room where this is what Avery was alluding to before, and I was being quite cagey about answering the question. But they went into a building where there was a room. They followed somebody in there, but there was a book, and they saw that she wrote her name in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then after writing her name in the book, she took a key out of a box and then opened a door and went through the door and went up some stairs. And they picked the lock and they tried to go through the door, but they had the situation exactly the same, where there was a corridor and some stairs, and the stairs just kept going. And they were like, oh, okay, what's going on? Maybe you have to write your name in the book. But then but the thing is, their names basically were not registered in the book, so it wasn't going to work.
Right.
It was a way of keeping them out, basically. But yeah.
That's
similar.
awesome. Yeah.
But no rugs to steal. Don't leave rugs lying around.
Yeah, I learned my lesson. No more rugs. Let's see. Okay, so we talked about doing some kind of a maze or some kind of a labyrinth. Even when it comes to mazes, I have been wanting to do this. I don't know when or where, but I want a maze that keeps changing. And for that, I need terrain that I plan on making where the tiles are movable so that the entire puzzle layout keeps changing.
Cube, the movie Cube.
Yes.
And Cube 1, 2, and 3. This is great stuff for traps and puzzles and mazes.
That's actually a great. Yeah, I think I've seen the first one. I don't know that I didn't know there was a second and third, so I'll have to look into that.
There's a second and third. You should check them out. They're very cool.
Yeah. Okay, so we already talked about kind of like code cracking, but matching symbols, matching patterns, paying attention to, like, if you see a pattern on one floor and then you see it on floor number 5 or something, maybe there's something to that,
Right.
So
and what you can use for those patterns can be things like the 5 elements or the deities of your world or something like that, or some specific lore related stuff. It shouldn't be random.
Exactly. Yes. The murder mystery, trying to figure, again, that kind of goes back to logic, but you could kind of throw a murder mystery as an encounter to get your group together, to get them working together, and they're solving a mystery.
Yeah, right. I mean, I've got a whole mini campaign about solving a mystery, which I often throw into various campaigns.
Yeah.
I stole it, actually. It's a one shot that I stole, but it turns out to be about 3 sessions long. It's called Greymoor. You can find it online. It's free to steal. It was written by a Kiwi, actually, who now works with Matthew Colville, weirdly enough. And I've run it about 3 times in different contexts, and it's quite a fun little thing. It's set in town. A bunch of people have died. You got to go there and solve the mystery and figure it out. And it's a pretty cool little one shot. Yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, very cool.
Murder mystery, so.
And
but
then
that's a mystery rather than a puzzle, really, when it gets bigger like that.
Yeah. Well, I guess, if it's meant to be a one shot, the problem is that then it turns into like a 3 shot. But if you could somehow get that condensed into a one shot, I would be okay saying that's a puzzle. Combat puzzles. So if I take this from Final Fantasy, and I'm sure they probably do this in other like action RPG type games. Like The Witcher, I think they do this as well. But you're in the middle of combat with a monster, and the monster has an Achilles heel, but you need to figure out what that Achilles heel is to be able to take down that monster. So I consider that a puzzle, especially if you seed in the clues before the encounter or during the first round of the encounter. If there's some way to seed in that clue and get them to try to puzzle it out as they're in combat. Or
combat during doing puzzles too. You're trying to solve the puzzle to stop the trap while the monsters are fighting you.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. I think I mentioned it in last week's episode, but I had an encounter where my players were fighting a monster that was most definitely too strong for them. They knew this monster is not going to die. We have to figure out this puzzle to be teleported out of this region, or else we will die. And so that was a really fun, it's a fun way to kind of add an extra element. I think we talked about this too with scaling monsters. Add a puzzle in your combat, and that kind of ups the difficulty and the challenge just a little bit.
For sure.
Yeah, and then, add any complex combination of everything I've just talked about already. So here's the thing. So puzzles, I don't know that they're essential, but I would say gauge the players at your table, right? Because I have players who are very much like I said, I have one that's into Legend of Zelda. He loves that kind of puzzle element in the game. I have another
Right.
player who I also believe is very much into puzzles, word puzzles, number puzzles, things of that nature. I have another player, which I'm going to talk about this later, but props. Any kind of props, physical props that you can have in a
Right.
game. She tends to be the one to really figure out the physical prop puzzle first.
Right.
So
What would you call a physical prop puzzle?
okay, so yeah, I'll go
How,
ahead and get
how would
into
that
this now. So I I love I just search on the internet sometimes when I'm sure people do all the time. I just search on the internet when I'm bored, but I have certain areas that I like to go to, and
Yeah.
through those avenues I have found there's a pen that you can write with, and if you put flame to the writing will disappear. So what you
Right.
do with that is you use a combination of regular pen plus this special pen. I think it's called Elemental Ink Pen. I got it on.
Okay.
I could get it on Amazon, but you can get it in other places too. So you do a combination of regular ballpoint pen plus this pen, and then you seed in clues that they found this piece of paper. You actually hand them the piece of paper, and it just looks like weird runic symbols. But then
Right.
you kind of keep dropping hints about the element of fire, this and that. And that one player
Right.
goes, wait a minute. And she pulled out a lighter, and then you just run the lighter along the paper, and the pieces that go away, what's left
Nice.
is actually words. So
Right.
yeah, that was
Cool.
really fun. I also have a
Sounds like a
pen.
fire hazard, though.
It does. I mean, you got to know your players, right? I had a
Doesn't work on
puzzle
Zoom.
with it was another type of pen that wrote it what was like invisible ink, but the pen cap actually had a light on it that it would pick up the invisible ink. So I've used that on hand-drawn maps that they've found where I use the invisible ink to mark special locations, and at some point after they'd already had the map, I explained that they find this magical item, which was, I think it was called the Wand of Secrets, is what I called it. And then I
Right.
hand them this pen and say, here's your Wand of Secrets. And together, they're all looking at this pen like, what? And, they can press the button and they see that it has a light. And it took them a little while to figure out, like, oh, if I apply this light to paper, like, let's put it to the map. And now all of a sudden they're seeing X marks the spot. They're seeing a circle around this city. They could see writing on the back of the map if they wanted to. I can even use the pen on physical maps that I make or physical terrain.
Right.
Wizard's Tower, one of the rooms, it's a very small, it was like a 10 by 10 room. Very small. No,
Right.
sorry. 10 squares. So I'm thinking 10 inches. So 10,
Right. So 50 feet.
50 feet. Yeah, thank you. I was like,
10
why can't
square
I do
feet.
the math? So 50 by 50. But almost every tile of the floor was magically trapped to explode. And they figured that out after the first couple steps when they take a step and they explode. And they're like, what the heck?
Right.
Take another step and they explode.
Oof. Right.
And then my son, he was a druid. He summoned a bunch of like little birds and basically sacrificed them to like throw on the floor and figure out where the tiles were. But in the end,
Right.
they figured out that if they used the Wand of Secrets, I had marked the tiles that were, I can't remember if they were the good tiles or the bad tiles, but I had marked the tiles and the Wand of Secrets would show them that. So invisible ink pens with the little light.
Right.
Very cool.
Right.
I could go on, but yeah, so that's my
kind
idea of
similar
physical props.
to the light cantrip thing.
Yeah.
Too. Sort of plays into that. I was going to say too, just to add another dimension here. When designing puzzles, this is a great opportunity. If you're a DM and you, like me, you create a lot of lore, here is an opportunity to encourage the players to learn the lore by making the puzzles relate essentially to the lore in some way. If you've got certain historical things that are part of your lore, or certain religious aspects, or whatever, stuff that's from your world, specifically from your world, and you've spent a lot of time on it, build it into a puzzle so that the players, and then of course you get the opportunity to dump a bunch of hints regarding that too. I guess the closest thing I've had to that was in Frostmore Crows, where they had this giant Unglamore. She was the daughter of Memnor, the trickster god of the giants, and she was chained up and paralyzed, turned to stone for thousands of years. And the players came into a room filled with murals, and as they went around the room, this massive room, they were reading and looking at the murals, trying to decipher them, learning the lore and fighting monsters all the way room as they went. And when they got back to Unglamore, they then had to choose whether or not to free her based on what they thought about A, the stuff that was on the walls, and then B, her own testimony. They had to compare the testimony of the giants, which were on the walls, to her personal testimony when they took off her gag.
Yeah.
And so then they had to decide whether or not to free her based on that. Not exactly a trap, but it kind of a puzzle.
Yeah, exactly. And that is actually a very good point about, seeding the hints within your lore, because if you spend a lot of time homebrewing your lore, you want them to learn about it and take that in, and what better way to incentivize them than solving a puzzle.
Right, exactly, especially when it's sort of high stakes.
Yeah. So the other thing, we talked about all the different types, and I mentioned that, puzzles are not necessary, but feel out your players, because if you have players that really love puzzles, then you have the go ahead to really drop them in, like maybe every session, every other session, in one way or another. But if you have players who really hate puzzles, then don't do it, because they're not necessary.
Right.
But
not everybody does like puzzles, to
be
fair.
Not everybody does.
I mean, you can sort of space them out every few sessions or every 10 sessions or something like that to make it more sort of palatable to those players.
Right.
The other aspect of that is, like, for me personally, I'm just not that smart. So figuring out writing puzzles is actually fucking hard work. It's really hard work for me to come up with a puzzle.
Yeah.
So stealing puzzles is probably the most
That's
obvious
the way
thing
to go.
do.
Yeah.
Or if occasionally I get inspired to create a puzzle, and I will do that. But that's probably why I don't have as many puzzles in my game as I could do. It's just it's laziness.
Yeah.
Puzzles are hard. They're hard to make. I mean, you've got to think at least as hard as players have to. So yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is I feel like I would guess half the people that don't like puzzles, the reason they don't like puzzles is because they were a part of a puzzle that wasn't run well. And so this is my next point: is just like you were saying, seed your lore in the clues and things like that. You don't want to lock lore away or lock your puzzle, your game away behind a roll. And that's what's going to happen. Yeah. If you're trying to run your players through a puzzle and they're all stuck because they can't figure out what to do next, or what is this clue leading me to, and you have them roll for it, and then you're like, well, sorry, you didn't roll high enough, I guess you guys are just gonna have to figure it out. No one's gonna have fun doing that. So you really need to make sure that lock things away behind rolls that are really necessary to be behind rolls. Other than that, what I would probably do is do the tier of, if you roll low, you get a clue, but it's maybe not as helpful of a clue. I think we talked about this before, right? And then if you kind of roll in the middle, give them kind of a mid-sized clue. But if they roll well, now you're giving them all the information they need to figure out the next step. So
and
just
you got multiple players in the group, so they have multiple opportunities as well. And giving them more than one chance to figure that out is definitely a good idea.
Exactly. Because here's the thing, right? Like with puzzles and riddles, we also talked about metagaming, right? Puzzles and riddles are kind of metagamey, because you could have, my husband plays a barbarian who can't read. And yet, when we have puzzles in the game, he's like, I think I know the answer. But then he'll ask me out of game, like, how does my character, who doesn't understand how to read symbols, or like, how do I get them the answer in game? And I said, well, and we'll lean into something like, well, maybe you can luck into it. Like you see that there's, that stone that needs to be pressed, and you just kind of lean against the wall, like Indiana Jones, just lean against the wall with your elbow, hit the button,
Right,
and like, whoops.
accidentally sets it up. I have a mechanism for this, actually. I mean, for me, rather than allowing characters that shouldn't be able to think of things give the answers to the other players, what I will do is someone will come up with an answer and say, well, what about this? Oh, but my character wouldn't have thought of that. You can then give the other players an investigation check or a history check or whatever's relevant to see if they would come up with that idea. Even though the player didn't think of it, the X player did think of it, and they can't hand out the information, but now the group knows about it as in the meta. So how do they come up with that idea? Or even if I'm the DM, sometimes I will come up with an idea that the players could use, and allow them to make a check to see if they think of that idea, and then give them either a clue or the actual information.
Right.
I don't tend to let players that shouldn't have come up with stuff come up with it, especially when the player sort of agrees. But I mean, that being said, there are flukes, there are times when that does happen. Even in real life, sometimes the dumbest person in the room can come up with the smartest thing because everybody else is overthinking
hey,
it.
what's that spot on the wall? It looks different. Like, that's it, you know?
Right.
So that's, I guess that's kind of a good metagamey. We were talking about good versus bad metagamey, but good metagamey, running puzzles in your game allows the players who wouldn't normally, like, their character wouldn't figure it out, but the player can figure it out, and that gives the player a little bit of a dopamine hit, like, I'm smart and I figured this out. Now how do I communicate this to my party?
I feel like the players should be able to use all the ideas that the group comes up with, but the characters have to, and that's where the metagame is for the players to figure out who comes up with it rather than necessarily specific character. So So
just like traps, we were talking about mixing it up. Make sure you mix it up, okay? You don't want to run the same water temple puzzle, like we just solved this and now we're going to do it, but it's Earth style, like...
Right.
I mean...
Just go through the elements. You could do that. But...
I mean, you could do that, but don't make the actual puzzle exactly the same, right? You'll need to change the levels that they're going to, or whatever the puzzle is.
Right. I mean, the other thing too is like, the whole puzzle could be a trap, in the sense that even if you succeed at the puzzle, it was a trap.
Yeah.
And the puzzle was designed as a MacGuffin. It's designed to send you off in the wrong direction. It was a trap designed to fuck with you in the first place.
Because, players and characters are probably like, oh, this looks important. Let's figure this out because it's probably important. And it was, but not in the way you think.
Right. And it just leads you to the next major set piece location, where you're now traveling out to another city or something. And, because the real thing wasn't there. We were looking for the Stone of Truth, but it was in fact stolen 10,000 years ago. So when you finally open the puzzle and the door opens, it's gone. So you can use it as a plot point.
Let's see. Oh, so yeah. When and where to use them, right? Like I said, mix it up. Don't use them all the time unless you have a party that's like, yes. Try them try them in combat every once in a while just to add some complexity. Also, if you have a party that is like hack and slash is the way that they go about business all the time, change it up and throw a puzzle in there, because that will really get them to kind of think on their feet and change their tactics a bit, and maybe get them out of the hack and slash if that's what you want to try. Like, I mean, not that hack and slash is bad. If you got a party that loves it and you love it, great. But if you want to try to give them a flavor of something else and see if they like it, that's what you could do. And then out of combat, you want to use it to like progress to the next area. Right? If you want to maybe put a puzzle in there that halts their progress so that they have to figure out this puzzle so that they can get to the next area.
Sort of between sections or so on.
Right.
I have a... Yeah.
Okay, sorry. One more. And then also,
go.
if you want to, you can also put information behind the puzzle and the information is what progresses the plot, right? Like
Right.
my party has an open world and they don't know what location to go to next. They know that once they finish this area, they have to figure out where they're going next. But guess what? Right before they leave, there's going to be a puzzle. And in that puzzle, there will be information released when they figure it out that will then
Right.
lead them to the next area. And now they know where to go.
Right.
So, all right,
What
what
I
were
was
you going
going
to
to
say?
say is, well, as far as puzzles and mysteries are concerned, you can create the idea that I have here is the mission is a puzzle.
Mhm.
And this is okay. So I'm going to take an example from Sunfall, where the players have a mission. One of the missions that they've got on the table at the moment is to extract a list of enemies from this particular wizard, this particular Barakyle envoy wizard. And they've done some research, and they've learned that this wizard makes a trip to the market once a week, he has 4 apprentice wizards with him every time he goes, a little entourage, right? And they go to the market, and when they get there, the 4 wizards wait outside while the main guy goes inside this tent that's on the outside of this building. They tried to get in the back of the building, and that's where that whole magical door thing I was talking about earlier happened. So they figured they can't get into the back of the building. They tried going in there as a I think somebody turned into a cat and snuck in there. The druid went in as a cat and had a bit of a look around. So they figured that out. And they've spent like literally months planning how they're going to get this list out of this guy. And more recently, they've discovered that the list is not even physical. It's in this guy's head. So there's not even a physical list.
Oh, wow.
They didn't know that at first. So they've spent months trying to figure out how they're going to get this list from this guy. Now, this guy's A, powerful, B, he has got 4 backup wizards with him. It's in a marketplace, so there's people around and there's guards, and they've been sort of working on various ways to sort of assassinate this wizard or capture him or what have you. More recently, they've come up with there's been a new player who's joined the group, and he has a whole different approach to it, which is interesting. I mean, I think the approach that he's got is an entirely new way of going about it, and now they're seriously investigating that direction. But what I'm getting at really is that you can create a situation in which you might not even necessarily have an answer to this puzzle. And you can watch the players come up with ways of doing it, ways of getting around it, or ways of getting through it, or what have you. It doesn't have to be an absolute correct answer. There could be multiple ways to get through it. And, give the players credit in terms of that they come up with some really great ideas about what something could be or how something could be approached. And if you do that, you tend to get pretty good results, honestly.
Yeah.
So yeah, mission as a puzzle.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I do love that. 'Cause you can really tailor that to your world, the puzzle.
Right.
Right. Avery made a comment, and I love it so much, and I'm afraid to say it out loud because I think my husband's still listening. He's going to play this, but I love Avery. I'm just going to say that. I just love what you posted. Great idea for a quick little puzzle. For anybody who's not watching live, just go to our Facebook page and then you'll see the comments. That's how I'm going to direct you to our Facebook page. All right.
Yeah.
And you know what? Actually, that was probably a moot point because my husband could just go to the Facebook page and look at it too. But anyway. Okay, so we talked about the what and the where and the when and let's talk about how. Okay, so we talked about look to existing examples of puzzles. We've talked about puzzles in, various forms of media, movies, books, smartphones, and you can take any of that and just reflavor that and put that in your world. You also, when you put your puzzle in the game, describe everything as clearly as possible. There is nothing more frustrating, and especially for someone like me. When I play, I'm a very visual player. And so if I don't have something visual to look at while the puzzle is being described, then you better describe what I'm seeing as clear
really
as
clearly.
possible, or else
Yeah, for
there's no way
sure.
I'm going to solve the puzzle because I
And
don't
that's one of
understand.
my worst habits as a DM, and well, maybe not a habit, but flaw.
Right.
Is failing to give all the information and then having to insert it back in later after the players have spent 15 minutes trying to figure it out, and you're like, oh,
Right. You're like, "Oh, I forgot to tell
too
you
much.
this," That I mean,
Yeah, there was a
I'm
chair
not
in that room.
faultless.
Oh,
Yeah. But
right.
yeah, just do
We
your
make
best
mistakes.
to describe the situation as clearly as possible for everyone because just because you can see it in your head, they cannot.
Right.
And you really just don't want to start the puzzle off with them already being confused. Make them feel like they have purpose and they can start, okay?
Right. Agency. Yeah.
Yes. Make sure they have all the puzzle pieces to start, okay? I already said don't hide anything behind a dice roll.
Right. Unless it's a
And
matter of figuring out that they need more pieces. Maybe they just have a piece of the puzzle.
that's true,
And,
right?
and there could be, but then they have to know that they've only got a piece of the puzzle.
Right. And then lastly, I would say be prepared that you may have to provide a visual. Again, for example, when I'm playing the game that I'm playing in, there are so many times where I have to ask the DM, like we have a whiteboard almost specifically for this purpose because I'll say,
Right.
okay, you said the corridor is off to the left, but there's a door over here, and there's a door, and where's the door, and how far is the door, and why is there a stone, and where's the stone? And so sometimes we just have a whiteboard so he can quickly draw out just a little bit of relational space for me to understand so that I can help solve the puzzle. Otherwise, I'm useless. So
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
be prepared. You
Yeah.
might have to provide some form of
Visual
visual or
aid.
some form of some aid in some way.
Yeah.
Be prepared to give hints again because there will come a time where they're frustrated and they don't know what they're supposed to do next. And usually what I do is I will have someone, whoever's asking, say,
Yeah.
okay, go ahead and roll. Like for whatever clue I think I'm about to give them, I'll say, go ahead and roll, a history check because it's going to be lore that they're not thinking of. Or, roll a wisdom check because there's a floor tile that is, if you just happen to perceive it, So
Right.
give them some kind of roll and then again, give them some kind of a hint, not depending on how well they roll, but don't not give them hints is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Right. Right. For sure.
Right.
That
And
makes
then
perfect sense.
sometimes depending on if they're just being stubborn and they're not asking for help, but they cannot figure it out, then I will try to find lore reasons is what I call it, to just tell someone to make a roll or to give them the extra knowledge because of lore. Like
Right.
we have a dwarf and he has, he knows stone really well. So then I would say, hey, roll a history check for me real quick or a wisdom to perceive this because you understand stone. And so you know that this stone looks very different. It's cut from a different ravine or whatever than this stone.
Right.
Something
Right.
lore reasons.
Right. It's
So,
been placed in there at a different time. You can
right.
tell it's aged differently, or
Yeah. Something to that effect. And then, like you said, try to be flexible in that there might be more than one way to solve the puzzle, right? You
Right.
know that the puzzle is that they need to hit that floor tile. But if they're frustrated and there's a door and you've got a barbarian who just wants to smash down the door,
brute force.
maybe let them try to smash down the door, but let them
You
roll
can
for
try
it
and
and
brute
figure it out.
force it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you sort of exactly. I mean, and also if you've planned it out and if it's like, for example, if it's a one shot, and I mean, I run a lot of one shots with players I've never met, right?
Mm-hmm.
And throwing in puzzles like that, you have to be very careful because you can end up with a group of people who just don't think about puzzles. They've never played before. They don't know what to expect. They don't know how to approach this.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could play with a bunch of expert players or a mixed bag. And they might have classes and things that don't have skills for this. So maybe you have to keep it open to different approaches. The thief could pick the lock, the barbarian could smash the door down, the mage could cast. Actually, this is a thing I missed from earlier about the dispel, about magical traps. Apparently, dispel magic has a chance of basically disarming most magical traps. So keep that in mind.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, that's a thing. At least it says that in the DM's guide. You don't have to use it. It's just a thing, but it's good to think about. There should be an option to be able to disarm a trap using some form of magic like that, and dispel magic makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, whether or not it works permanently or not is another thing. But,
well, and the other thing you could think of is if you have someone who's very keen on casting dispel magic, well, maybe you put a big encounter after so many traps because they've now used their slots to
right.
instead of trying to beat this trap or solve it some other way, they just keep casting their spells. Well, they might be tapped out by the time you hit this big monster.
Right.
You know, I don't know.
Sure, yeah. Makes sense.
Okay, so tips and tools and tricks. Obviously, if you are looking for, puzzles, you can always Google search, right? There are various riddle generators and puzzle generators online as well. However, one of my and I'm going to share this. I know I haven't promoted anybody else in a while, so I'm going to do it. I can hear Doc yelling at me from wherever he's at. But there is a YouTube channel run by Wally DM, and if you have not heard about it, he has great ideas for puzzles because they're very intricate, and I almost feel like I have to take notes when I watch his videos to like give myself a little primer for when I describe the puzzle to my players. But they're so intricate, so you can really reflavor almost any piece of his puzzle to fit your world. And they're not just the standard puzzles, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So go to his channel. I love his channel. It's all about puzzles. And then, like I said, try out physical props in your puzzles. You know, you could even, I played in this game where it was a word puzzle where it was like a 5-letter letter combination. But it wasn't until about halfway through, and there was also a combat encounter. So it was a puzzle in a combat encounter where we had to guess this 5-letter phrase, and we were fighting like an aspect of a deity. And so we were like, oh, well, let's guess the deity's name. It's a deity's name. It wasn't until about halfway through the encounter that the DM finally gave us the physical prop, which looked like, I think it was National Treasure. No, maybe, I can't remember, but it looked like a little sphere with like little spinny letter combinations. So like the size of a scroll, and it was really fun because now all of a sudden we're like, oh, we have a physical thing. And so now half of us are trying to figure out the physical thing while the rest of us are in game trying to figure out the puzzle. And so there was a lot of interaction just by introducing the physical prop. Really fun.
Cool. That's awesome.
All right. Yeah. So again, make sure your players want puzzles. Telegraph. Okay, I'm sorry. Going through my notes, making sure I'm not forgetting anything. Don't reuse the same puzzle, though you can disguise it, which I talked about. Reflavor things and disguise it very well. And just here's the thing. Okay. Here's what I'm going to say. Just, even though I'm telling you all these things, and you're going to put it in your mental checklist of, okay, make sure I do this. Don't do this. Make sure I do this as you're running the puzzle. What is the ultimate rule is feel your player's energy as they're doing this puzzle. Because as soon as you really start feeling their frustration, you need to step in. Again, it's all about, the puzzle is supposed to be fun. And if it becomes super frustrating for everyone, just move on.
Boring
your
or
puzzle.
frustrated.
Your puzzle is not more important than their fun. so move it along.
And in ways of doing that, I mean, one way you can do that is you can have, for example, let's say we've got a dungeon and there's a bunch of goblins in there and they've set up a trap, and there's a puzzle to get past the trap. Now, if you were to catch a goblin and not kill them and interrogate them, they might know the answer. You know, there are other ways of getting past puzzles. Somebody knows how to do it. And there are NPCs in the world that probably do know how to get past that puzzle. It's just a matter of finding them. And maybe you have to go to some extra trouble to do that, but it's still possible.
Yep.
I don't know. That's just something I just thought of. So I'd throw that in
No,
there.
I like that though. I that's the thing is there's always some NPC sitting in the wing for something like that. Like even if it's not the goblin knows, but there's a wandering. I don't know. I guess there wouldn't be a wandering merchant inside of a dungeon, but yeah, some NPC
Right.
that you can figure out why they're there in the dungeon that happens across, and now
Right.
there's a
Right.
way for them to get clues, more clues.
Right.
Um, and then lastly, I would say if you have a party like mine where maybe they don't want to ask for help, but it's not moving forward, the best way to move it forward I've found out is to create the clock. There's a
Yeah.
ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
The room is closing in now.
Right.
Just like you said, some reason for them to
Right.
realize that they need to solve this puzzle now, or they need
Yeah.
to break the puzzle, or whatever it is. But we need to
Yeah.
get it going.
Yeah,
So.
time lock is the writing term for that, and it's one of the great three or four best ways of creating tension. Time locks and option locks, where you have fewer and fewer options because you've used up the options.
Yeah.
And now you've got only one way to go. You've broken the puzzle. You can't get through the door anymore because the puzzle's fucked. So now you're gonna have to find another way through the door. So you need another option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, boy, I felt like maybe my notes weren't as clear and concise as they could have been, but I feel like I covered everything. So you and everyone in the chat, let me know if I missed something.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
got any other puzzles or traps that you can think of or have heard about or have played through or ran?
yes.
I would love to hear those. I'm sure Amber would too.
Yes. The one Avery put in the chat is just, I can't
That's
wait.
great, isn't it?
That's a good one.
I can't use that now because Avery's used it and he's seen it before. So I could use it on someone that wasn't Avery, I suppose, or anybody else in the chat. Damn it. Oh, well.
So let's go ahead and move on to our next segment, which is the weekly world building. And what Russell and I discussed that we would try here for this world building, and anybody in the chat, feel free to join in, is we're going to build some traps and puzzles. But what we want to do is take into mind who is setting this trap or who is placing this puzzle here, right? Because that could really give you the context you need for what type of trap or what type of puzzle or what does this trap do if it gets triggered. So I just went out to my favorite online NPC generator. So we're going to create someone and then let's talk about what kind of puzzle or trap they might set.
Right.
Okay, so I have a 29-year-old male human rogue who worships a god of fire, believes in purification through fire, haunted by horrible memories. I think all the other information, it's like height. I don't know if height's important. Physical appearance might not be important.
We want to know what their motives are and what their resources are.
Okay.
I think that's what's important. Do
okay,
they have followers? Do they run a cult?
His home was infested by zombies. Upon further inquiry, the zombies used to live there and are claiming the house belongs to them.
Right. So, well, maybe the traps are for catching zombies. Maybe it's maybe he's building traps specifically for that purpose. And zombies are, I believe, possibly vulnerable to fire.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, certainly in terms of like common pop culture, they are.
Right. I mean, the giveaway would be, any traps that are set. If they get triggered, it's fire damage. It's a fireball, or I also like the idea of like a puzzle that requires fire to figure it out. Just like the pen that I mentioned, like you need fire to clear part of the runes so that you can see what the word says or something to that effect. Okay. I mean, fire puzzles. Yeah. So not just fire damage, but fire to solve it as well.
Right.
Okay, let's see.
So it could be to do with the fuel for the fire. You have to get the fuel for the fire from one part of the dungeon and bring it to another part of the dungeon. You've got to ignite it somehow with something else. Yeah. You've got to do it in the right location.
You know, we can even
Perhaps.
take it one step further because it's talking about purification through fire. So, like,
Right.
usually the result of that is you have maybe a little bit of soot left over, or so what if there's a puzzle involving, like, kind of like a charcoal rubbing, like you need to take, you don't have a way to take a picture of something, but maybe there's an elaborate tablet that has something on there and you can do like a chalk rubbing that you need to take to this other area because you need to
Right.
reference it to solve that room's puzzle. That's a little
Right.
complex, but you know, soot.
Starts getting convoluted easily, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I find with puzzles is I can easily get really convoluted
Yeah.
and get to the thing is they've got to be simple enough that players can solve them in the time that they have. You know, whereas the characters might be there for, hours figuring it out. The players have to do it within the space of a session, usually. So it can't be so complex that they can't figure it out.
Okay, so, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm imagining we talked about the corridor with the ooze, but what if it was a corridor that was like, you know, the firewalkers, how you have to walk
Right.
on the fire. There's no other way, so you have to be
Right.
able to find a way to walk on fire to get to the next area. I don't know if that's a
Right.
trap, but let me think about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Maybe it looks like a normal walk unless you hit the wrong tile. Then it becomes a walk of fire.
Right. You could also have, lava is always fun.
Yeah.
The floor is lava.
Lava's always so dangerous to add in the game, but so fun.
Right. I think
All
we've
right.
got quite a hard one here. Fire traps are tricky, especially without magic.
Yeah.
Unless you've got like burning pitch or something like that could fall on the characters or something like that.
Oh,
And
that
I'm thinking if there
sounds
are
deadly.
right, that's nasty.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the sort of thing people used to do to each other in siege warfare, boiling oil and pitch and tar and things like that. That's pretty nasty. And set them on fire. It's like casting most player characters have a flask of oil or something floating around in their knapsacks, and you could make a wee trap using a flask of oil that drops on the enemies, and then you can throw a torch at them.
Yeah.
That's a simple kind of tactic, and there's a difference between tactics and traps. There's a bit of crossover there as well. So,
yeah, because now I'm envisioning, like, imagine a room where there's a large chasm, depending on your level of players, right? Like, you don't want to do this when your players can fly already or things like that.
Right.
But have a very large chasm, and there's like a big giant statue on the other end with, a hand open that looks like fire should be there. And so you got to get fire over there. But how do you get fire over there if you can't fly, and that's a
So you've got
great
to figure
puzzle.
out there's a puzzle involved. Yeah. Avery mentioned the end of the fifth element where there is a shrine that needs fire to activate it.
Yeah, exactly. So that sounds perfect. Okay, let's see. Let's try another one. Oh, this might be a little bit harder.
Have you considered we could take NPCs, like famous NPCs, like what's his face, Vecna, or
oh, sure.
Something like that, and choose NPCs from the game lore that I don't know. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, let's try it.
It's probably harder because we have to then go into the lore of that NPC. And
I was gonna say I need.
do we know the NPCs and each other's NPCs and so on? And then we probably should have talked about that beforehand. Yeah. But never mind. We'll go with your system. I think it's working.
Okay, sure. I was just gonna say maybe just one more. Let's see if I can find one more. Okay. This would be really fun. Okay. So this is an 86-year-old female mountain dwarf druid. Okay. Right. However, she worships Morden, who's the god of dwarves, creation, smithing, protection. Yeah, forge work, metalwork, stonework.
Right.
So I find that to be very interesting because I feel I'm already imagining like a huge stone temple or dungeon, but her puzzles and traps are all like there's
I've got a
overgrown
great idea for
greenery
this.
and vines and things like that. Yeah, go ahead.
What if you had to forge the key?
Ooh, I love that. That sounds fun.
I had one game where there were some dwarves. The players it was in the Underdark, and the players actually, Charlie, you might have been there for this. There was a situation where this cannibal dwarf clan had invited the player characters into their little town, basically, and then kind of locked them in a room, and they didn't realize they were locked in this room. They wanted to get out. After a while, they started to figure out they'd been locked in this room, and they were getting fed this weird soup that had bits in it for a while now, and they're starting to think, oh fuck, this has got like fingers and shit in it. What are we eating? So they were like, okay, we've got to get out. And there was a door in the room that had a keyhole, but they didn't know how to get through it. But they knew that inside that door there was an armory, and so that was the puzzle. And ultimately, one of the players came up with the idea of using water and using magic to freeze the water in the keyhole and making it a key by freezing the water in the keyhole. And he broke like several keys trying to do it because they would snap when you tried to twist it. But eventually it started to work. So, there's ways and means. But the idea of having a forge in the dungeon, that the players find a forge, they find the materials for the forge, maybe in one place or in different places, and then they have to make the key.
Yeah.
There needs to be a mold and so on. I don't know. There's a thought.
Yeah, no, that is a wonderful thought. I love that. But what I love about that also was being flexible so that when they came up with the idea of the water and the ice, super smart. I love that idea.
Right. I mean, I expected them to fight their way out and they didn't.
Yeah.
They did something else. So
yeah. I love the forging. I went a totally different route, which is she's a druid. So I was like, oh, so she's like, it's weird because she worships Moradin. I'm trying to figure out how that would work as a druid.
Is that a randomly generated NPC?
It is a randomly generated NPC. Right. So that's why I'm
that explains a lot.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe the traps would involve. It would almost be like there's mechanisms, but there's one nature or natural element within the mechanism to make it work.
I mean, metal is a natural occurring substance.
That's true. You're right.
There could be some aspect of that.
Yeah.
There could be a, I don't know. I mean, maybe you have to fight an earth elemental to obtain the ore that you need to smelt to get so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Something like that could be an aspect of it.
Yeah. I feel like, you really hit the nail on the head with forging the key. So I kind of feel like I can't think of anything better than that. We're just going to leave it at that.
I mean, if we go down the druid route instead and try and think of a druidic puzzle, maybe that's another way. I mean, then I start thinking of, as you say, labyrinths and vines and so on, and that kind of stuff is sort of mazy type things with enchanted vines that grab you. And
what if it looks overgrown by vines and greenery, but all the vines and greenery are stone? It's all stonework.
Right.
Not sure why, but the visual is lovely.
Well, so it's an aesthetic that's layered on top of it.
Yeah.
That could work. Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
It certainly gives it a flavor, which is good.
I can see more of like a statue puzzle or something. Like there's a room with a circle of statues that look like they're, druidy looking, but everything is stone. And there's maybe a matter of like the statues need to be turned to be facing certain directions, or one arm up, one arm down. However you want to do that, that's already a puzzle right there to proceed to the next area.
Well, recently in the one shot that Caitlin ran for me that I was a player in, there were these pillars standing up out of the water, and we had to climb the pillars to these statues, and each statue had an object. One had I think there was a flute, and oh God, I can't remember the other things. But in any case, all these different objects, Well, that's right. There was a ribbon and a flute and some other musical instruments, I think. And we had to use them all in different ways to quell these various monsters that came at us.
Mm-hmm.
But we had to use the right instrument on the right group of monsters. And you would need to do that in order to get to the next pillar. So depending on which pillar you started with, you could only access a certain other pillar easily without fighting.
Right.
So yeah, it didn't stop you entirely, but it created a situation where you would end up in an encounter instead.
Yeah, yeah. See, I like that aspect of puzzles. Is almost like if you can create a puzzle that has stages, and if they guess the next step correctly, then they can proceed without issue. But if they guess it
Right.
incorrectly, then now there's a little encounter,
Right.
complications. Yeah.
Avery, what are they real vines but petrified? Yeah, it could
Could
be. I mean,
be,
that's yeah,
or it's
definitely
just an aesthetic thing where everything looks overgrown, but everything's made
right.
out of stone. Or maybe it's
Or they
like,
could look like stone vines, but they're in fact real vines that can grab you
yeah. Well, I
for
was
some
thinking
sort of
more like, what if everything was
empty.
overgrown and there was some massive spell that got kicked off that just like then turned everything into stone? And now you
Right.
have to try to bring everything back,
Unpetrified.
unpetrify it somehow. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
questions. So yeah, I don't know. I love this aspect of the world building exercise, which is just like random stuff and then we talk it out
Right.
because
Jamming.
that's my favorite
Yeah.
part of being a DM, I think, is trying to figure these things out for my players and then present it.
Right.
So anyway, all right, this is the part of the show where I say if you liked what we talked about, please remember to like and share our show, subscribe wherever you find our show. We're on YouTube. When the podcast gets posted, it is on all the podcast platforms: Amazon, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And I think we have a TikTok going. Pretty sure we have. I'm not on TikTok, but I should be.
Yeah. I've got a TikTok, but I barely use it.
Right. And as always, we are on Discord, so come find us. We're always looking for creative individuals to be a part of what we do. Also, if you just want to come hang out with us and chat, come find us in our Discord. Join our community.
And
So,
here's my details in the chat if anybody there that doesn't already have them.
oh, that's right.
Bang.
Yes. Go find
So,
Russell.
Yep, that's some stuff. And yeah, thank you very much for hanging out and chatting, and we all learned stuff, I think. At least
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Certainly I'm inspired to create some puzzles and fuck with people.
See, and I like that we split this up where you did traps and I did puzzles because I feel inspired to do more traps.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
we'll have to come back and report.
And puzzle traps.
And puzzle traps.
What's a good puzzle without a trap anyway?
So here's what it is so you present it to your players, and if they figure it out, then it was a puzzle because that's the positive side. But if they don't figure it out, then it's a trap. That was the negative side.
That is true.
Ha-ha.
Yes. Actually, just look, one last thing on puzzles. Objects as puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got simple things like Rubik's cubes in real life. Having a puzzle that you physically have to work out.
Yeah.
That opens and it's a puzzle to get into a box, or I mean, like a chest that has a puzzle could be a thing. It doesn't have to be a door. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big dungeon thing. It could be much more small scale.
Be, yes, a smaller scale.
Yeah.
There
anyway,
is. I want to say it's an official item, but I think it's called the Infernal Puzzle Box because I gave one to my player in game, and it's funny actually. Because I think it requires a roll of like 30 to be able to solve the puzzle in game. So it's not like there's a physical Rubik's Cube for my player to figure out. And they just kept trying and trying and trying, like until one day they finally got it, because you level up. So eventually you have a score high enough to be able to solve it. And so then finally when they solved it, I felt so bad because what was in there, I couldn't change. I should have, but I couldn't change what was in there because it was a piece of lore, and
Right.
they could have used it had they solved it earlier, but they couldn't
Right.
solve it, or it's just
Right.
it was one of
So
those
when they
things.
got it, it was a bit late, and they were like, "Ah, fuck, we could have
Right.
used that
They were
6
like,
months ago."
yeah, could have, yeah, exactly.
Actually,
So learn
what
from
you
me.
right, and what you can also do is you can give the players an opportunity to make a check once a day to
Right.
solve the puzzle. Only one check once a day, but eventually they should theoretically get it. I mean, even if there's a 1 in 100 chance, you roll a D100 once a day after so many days, they'll probably get it. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that slim. It could be much better than that. It could be 1 in 20. You have to
Yeah.
roll a D20 and get a natural 20 to solve the puzzle. And as you level up, yeah, you'd get bonuses for that. And whatever your proficiencies and, I don't know, intelligence, something like that could be a thing.
Could be.
Anyway,
Okay,
that's it for
so
me.
that's it for this week, and we will see you next week with a new topic. Not entirely certain what it is because I want to say what it is, but we may have to push it off. So I'm just going to
Yeah,
tease you guys and say it's going to be great, whatever it is.
it's going to be great.
and
Going to be great. Yeah, cool.
that's it. Did you want
That's
to
it.
take us out, or
Oh,
we don't have an outro yet?
I don't have an outro yet. I need to work on that. But thanks for being here and watching and like and subscribe and the doobly doo thingamajig
Yes.
and blood blah and stuff. And we really do appreciate those little things. They give us our dopamine hits that get us through the day. And apart from that, we want people to actually watch this stuff. So we put in a fair amount of work into it. I know that Amber puts in a lot more work than I do. She's there doing all the streamy button pressing stuff and setting up the stuff, and she's here for basically all day getting ready for this. And we need more people to watch. So we'd really appreciate it if you can like and subscribe and share it, especially share it. Get people to come and hang out with us. We'd like that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because these days can be fun days when you talk nerdy with friends.
Yeah.
All right. So we will see you all next week. Thank you.
Adios. Goodbye. 再见.